The dog nobody touched, until a 3-year-old reached through the bars. Winter's breath was sharp that afternoon, scraping against the metal doors of Haven Creek Shelter as though it wanted in. Shivering visitors clustered around the puppy kennels, clicking photos of wiggling tails and carefree yips. No one noticed the last corridor of the place where Hope went to hibernate, except Ellie. Barely 3, she walked straight past the cuteness and stopped at the final cage, where a German shepherd, ribs jutting like broken piano keys, lay motionless under a sign that read, "Aggressive. Do not approach. 1 heartbeat, 2. Ellie's mittens slipped off. Her tiny fingers threaded through rusted bars and touched a muzzle so scarred it looked carved from stone. The dog lifted his head, no growl. No warning, just a sigh that sounded older than the building itself. In that moment, the shelter's buzzing lights, the stale bleach smell, the shuffle of nervous feet, all of it disappeared. A single connection rewrote the end of 2 stories everyone else thought were already finished. What happens next will shatter every belief you hold about fear, healing, and the power a child's whisper can have over a dangerous heart. Stay with this tale because sometimes the scariest cage hides the greatest miracle. The sky above Haven Creek was the color of damp cement. Snow hadn't yet fallen, but the wind cut through town like a scalpel sharp, precise and devoid of mercy. The kind of cold that didn't sting the skin as much as it crawled into the bones and stayed there, whispering reminders of everything that had been lost. Nora tightened the scarf around her neck as she stepped out of her car, automatically reaching for the back door. Ellie was already there, her tiny gloved fingers struggling with the strap on her booster seat. The girl didn't speak, at least not often. And when she did, her words came slow and soft, like pebbles dropping into a deep well. "Got you," Nora murmured as she unbuckled the strap and lifted her daughter out. Ellie's arms wrapped loosely around her neck, her favorite stuffed fox dangling from one mittened hand. The toy was faded from too much love, its tail frayed and one button eye missing. The parking lot of Haven Creek Animal Shelter was nearly empty. A few tire tracks laced the slush-covered asphalt, leading to a squat brick building that seemed forgotten by time and hope alike. As they approached, Nora felt the familiar tightness in her chest, not panic, not sadness, something heavier, like standing at the bottom of a well with no rope, looking up at a sky that didn't know how to offer light anymore. Inside, the shelter smelled of bleach, metal, and quiet despair. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like a warning. The temperature was warmer than outside, but the kind of warmth that felt wrong, sterile, unfeeling. An elderly Labrador barked once before, retreating to its blanket in the corner. The halls echoed with the rustle of claws on linoleum and the muffled thud of tails wagging without purpose. "Miss Nora," called a voice from behind the front desk. It was Sharon, a silver-haired volunteer with kind eyes and too much practiced cheer. She smiled warmly, but with the faint edge of something strained, as if her optimism was a performance for the animals more than the visitors. "Back again?" Sharon said, glancing down at Ellie with a tilt of her head. "You two just can't stay away from us." Nora nodded politely, her lips curving into something that almost resembled a smile. Ellie's idea. Thought it might help. Sharon looked like she wanted to say something else, something deeper, perhaps, but thought better of it. She gestured toward the front room. "We've got a litter of golden retriever pups today. Just came in yesterday. Healthy, sweet as sugar. You might like them." The way she said it, the careful weight on the word healthy, didn't go unnoticed. Nora nodded again. "We'll take a look." But Ellie had already started moving. She didn't run. Ellie never ran. Instead, she walked with a kind of solemn purpose, like each step had been preordained. Her small boots tapped against the floor, too light to echo, as she passed row after row of cages. She didn't stop for the playful beagle puppies yipping for attention or the fluffy husky wagging at the glass. Her gaze was fixed, forward, somewhere unseen. Nora followed, the air thickening around her the farther they moved down the corridor. There was a part of the shelter that volunteers never promoted, the back wing, the forgotten row. It was colder here. As they turned the corner, the noises softened, no barking, no whines, just silence. The kind that pressed against the ears and made the heart beat louder in response. And then they saw him. The cage was set slightly apart from the others, shadowed by a flickering overhead light. A sign hung on the door. Milo. Special handling required. Aggressive. Do not approach. Inside lay a dog who looked like he'd once been magnificent. A German Shepherd, or something close to it. His frame was large but gaunt, every rib protruding like a mountain range beneath patchy fur. His left flank was raw with infection, the skin inflamed and dotted with scabs. His breathing came slow, rasping, and thick with effort. He didn't move when Ellie approached. "Ellie," Nora's voice cracked, reaching out instinctively. "No, sweetheart, we don't go near that one." But Ellie kept walking, as if pulled by something Nora couldn't see. The child stopped just outside the cage and crouched down, her tiny gloved hands resting on her knees. She didn't speak, didn't gesture, just watched. Milo blinked once, slow and heavy. Then, like gravity had shifted, he shifted too. It wasn't much, just a twitch of the paw, then a drag. Then, with a groan that sounded like a memory of pain, he moved forward inch by inch until his head rested against the rusted bars. His nose touched the cold metal, just inches from Ellie's outstretched fingers. He didn't growl. He didn't bark. Instead, he closed his eyes and exhaled. Ellie's small hand, unsure at first, reached through the gap and touched the side of his muzzle with all the tenderness of someone holding a butterfly. Then she whispered in a voice so soft Nora barely recognized it. "Doggie's sad. Doggie needs me." And with that, the walls Nora had built, inside herself bricks of grief, mortar of exhaustion began to crack. She stood frozen, unable to move, as if some ancient truth had just been spoken aloud by a child who barely spoke at all. The silence didn't feel cold anymore. It felt like the moment before a storm changes the sky. The corridor narrowed. Behind them, laughter echoed faintly, children squealing as they pressed their faces to glass, volunteers chuckling as golden puppies chased their tails. That was the part of the shelter people posted about the safe zone of second chances, bright lighting, and the illusion that healing was simple. But Ellie walked away from it all, her small boots padding softly on the stained linoleum, her shoulders square with quiet resolve. Nora followed, heart hammering harder with every step. She glanced over her shoulder. No one noticed them slipping out of the spotlight. No one stopped them from moving into the darker wing of the building, the one that always seemed colder, where the buzz of the light sounded just a little too loud, and the smell of antiseptic clung to the air like a warning. "Ellie," Nora called softly. Her voice didn't bounce. It sank, swallowed by the heavy silence. But Ellie didn't turn. The girl didn't run, didn't rush. She simply moved, like a compass needle toward true north, as if some invisible string was tugging her forward. She passed kennels with barely a glance. A terrier with cataracts let out a wheeze. A senior beagle turned its head but didn't rise. None of them drew her gaze. She walked until there were no more windows to look through, only shadows. And then she stopped. The last cage sat beneath a flickering light, half shadowed, half forgotten. Unlike the other kennels, there were no toys inside, no blanket, just a cold concrete slab and a rusted water bowl barely filled. A laminated sign hung crookedly from the bars, its corners curled with time. Milo's special handling required aggressive. Do not approach. Inside, the dog looked more like a ghost than a living thing. He didn't stir when Ellie arrived. His body stretched along the back of the kennel, so still it was hard to tell if he was breathing at all. His fur was matted, peppered with bald patches and lesions that glowed red against his pale skin. One hind leg twitched involuntarily. His chest rose barely and then fell again in labored rhythm. Each breath a fragile negotiation. "Mama," Ellie said, her voice so small, Nora almost missed it. Nora caught up, breath catching in her throat, when she saw what lay behind the bars. Her stomach dropped. "Oh, sweetheart, no," she whispered, stepping forward quickly. "Let's go back. Let's look at the puppies like we talked about." Ellie didn't answer. Her gaze stayed locked on the dog, this mangled creature of bone and fur and quiet defeat. She reached out, fingers not yet through the bars, but close. Nora crouched beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "This one, he's not like the others, honey," she said gently. "He's not for petting. He's very sick and very scared." But Ellie still didn't move. And then, almost imperceptibly, the dog's eyes opened. They were not wild, nor sharp, nor bright, just tired, deep pools of something ancient, amber dulled by time, by pain. His gaze didn't dart around or fixate on danger. It settled. On her. For a long moment, nothing happened. Not a twitch, not a blink. It was as if the entire shelter paused at every bark, every footstep, every flicker of the light ceased, and in that quiet space, something unspoken passed between the girl and the dog, a recognition. Not of sight or sound, but of sorrow. Nora reached to pull Ellie gently away, but the child took a step closer. "Ellie," I said no. Nora's voice tensed, more fear than force. Still, Ellie inched forward, stopping just short of the bars. She crouched low, the way a child might study an injured butterfly. Her toy fox dangled at her side. She didn't reach out. She simply watched. And something in the dog shifted. With a groan that came from deep within his chest, Milo stirred. His limbs quivered as he pulled himself forward agonizingly slow, clawing his way across the concrete with trembling paws and the grinding sound of nails scraping stone. Nora froze. His body heaved with effort, ribs rising like scaffolding under wasted skin. But he came, inch by inch, dragging a frame that looked like it hadn't moved freely in weeks, maybe months, until at last, he stopped, right at the edge of the kennel, one battered paw extended. Then his head dropped between his front legs, his nose resting against the rusted bars. A faint whine escaped him. Not a growl, not a threat, just grief. Ellie lowered herself fully to the floor, sitting cross-legged, face level with his, still silent. Her eyes never left his. Behind them, footsteps clicked softly on the concrete. Sharon rounded the corner and froze mid-step, her clipboard clutched to her chest. "No, no, no, Miss Nora, please, he's not for—" But the moment rooted them all in place. The broken dog, the silent girl, and the fragile thread that had just stitched two shattered things together. "No, Ellie, please." Nora's voice caught halfway between a whisper and a plea. Tangled with fear she didn't have words for. She reached out, fingers trembling, trying to pull her daughter back gently, urgently, helplessly. But Ellie was already lowering herself to the floor. Her knees folded beneath her, her gloved hands resting quietly in her lap. She didn't speak, didn't blink, just waited. And Milo, the creature deemed too dangerous to live, responded to that stillness as if it were a song only he could hear. He didn't lurch. He didn't bare his teeth. Instead, his breath came out in a long, broken sigh, like something ancient and heavy had finally been exhaled. He inched forward, not fast, not confidently, but deliberately. His legs quivered with every shift of weight. His claws scraped the concrete, the sound brittle like dry leaves underfoot. It was as though his body no longer knew how to move, only how to endure. Nora stood paralyzed. Behind her, Sharon had gone completely silent, clipboard frozen midair. No one breathed, no one interrupted. The moment had taken over, and none of them had any say in it anymore. Milo reached the bars. His head hung low, almost touching the floor. His ribs jutted through his patchy fur like ruins of a body that once served, once protected, once mattered. A body now discarded, forgotten, unwanted. And then he did the unthinkable. With the slow, careful grace of something sacred, he angled his battered face sideways and pressed his muzzle against the space between the rusted bars. And Ellie, without hesitation, leaned in. She slid forward, one small hand slipping through the gap to rest against the side of his face. Her fingers found the coarse, matted fur just beneath his ear. She didn't pet him, not at first. She just held the touch. Light, steady, undemanding. It was not a child's impulsive affection. It was something older, something knowing. Milo closed his eyes. A sound slipped from his throat low, hoarse and heartbreakingly soft. Not a growl, not a whimper. It was grief, given voice. It was the sound of something broken, recognizing kindness for the first time in a very long while. And then Ellie did something Nora hadn't heard in weeks. She spoke. "Doggy sad," she said, her voice barely above a breath. "Doggy needs me." 3 words. and Nora felt every one of them like a fist against the hollow part of her chest. Tears sprang to her eyes before she could stop them. It wasn't just the shock of Ellie speaking, it was the certainty in her tone, that quiet, unshakable conviction. The same voice she'd used the first time she'd tried to say Mama. The same voice she hadn't used at all since the funeral. Nora knelt slowly, her knees touching the cold floor beside her daughter. "Ellie," she whispered. But the girl didn't look at her. Her attention was fixed entirely on the dog. She slid her other hand through the bars and cradled Milo's face gently between her palms. His ears twitched, but he didn't flinch. His body, though trembling with weakness, stayed pressed against her touch. His eyes opened again, and for the first time, they looked different, not bright, not strong, but present. A sliver of something had returned to him, something beyond pain or fear. He knew her. "Miss Nora." Sharon's voice broke the stillness, trembling with disbelief. "That dog, he hasn't responded to anyone. Not once. Not even food." "Huh?" Nora looked up, and what she saw in Sharon's face wasn't procedure or policy. It was awe. "I've never seen him move on his own like that. He usually just lies there." Sharon's voice cracked. "He's been slipping away." Ellie rested her forehead gently against the bars, brushing her nose against Milo's. The child who couldn't put her nightmares into words had somehow reached the one soul in the room who understood without needing any. Milo's tail moved. Not much, just a twitch. But it was there, a flicker, a whisper of a dog who once knew how to hope. Nora felt the air change, as if the shelter, with all its grief and resignation, had suddenly exhaled. As if even the walls had seen enough sorrow and were ready just this one set to make space for something else. Something like a miracle. And still, Ellie stayed silent. Not because she was afraid, but because she didn't need to say more. She had said the only thing that mattered. "Dog needs me." And somehow, Milo had believed her. The moment shattered, the second Milo's eyes drifted closed again. His head remained pressed against the bars, Ellie's fingers still resting in the rutted patch of fur beneath his ear. Nora blinked hard, brushing at her cheek, startled by how wet her face had become. Behind her, the fluorescent lights buzzed like static in her ears. The warmth of the miracle that had just unfolded was already being chased back by the chill of reason, protocol, and everything she knew to be sensible. Sharon stepped forward slowly, clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. "Miss Nora," she said gently but firmly, "I know what you just saw felt. Remarkable. It was remarkable. But we have to be very careful here." Nora rose from her crouch, her body stiff, her voice lower than before. He moved to her. He let her touch him. I saw..." Sharon nodded, glancing at Milo, who hadn't stirred again. "But that doesn't change his file. It doesn't erase what he's been through, or how dangerous he still might be." Ellie sat cross-legged again, humming softly now, like she was soothing something ancient inside the dog. Milo twitched once in his sleep, but didn't pull away. "Is he really dangerous?" Nora asked. Sharon didn't answer right away. Instead, she gestured for Nora to step a few feet away, toward a folding chair beneath a wall-mounted bulletin board filled with faded flyers and volunteer schedules. "Let me show you something." She opened the manila folder clamped under her arm, revealing a stack of paperwork, medical notes, behavior evaluations, faded intake forms. She flipped until she found the one with bold red print. Behavioral warning. Da exhibits unprovoked defensive aggression. Reactive to mail handlers. History unknown. Likely trauma-related. Current status. Unadoptable. Scheduled for evaluation. Friday, the 10th of March. Nora's eyes fell on the date. That was 4 days away. "You said evaluation. That's euthanasia, isn't it?" Sharon exhaled, her expression softening. "It's our way of giving them one last chance. Sometimes we reassign animals to rescue networks. But truthfully, for one like him, sick, aggressive, unresponsive, there's no one waiting in line. No one willing to take on that much risk." Her voice lowered. "Less staff, more human. This shelter is overcrowded. We don't have the resources to give long-term rehabilitation, not the kind he'd need." Nora swallowed. She looked back toward Ellie, who now had her forehead gently pressed to the cage bars again, as if speaking in a language older than words. "What exactly is wrong with him?" she asked. Sharon didn't flinch. Severe malnutrition, untreated mange, a respiratory infection that's turning into pneumonia. And based on the tremors in his back leg, there's likely some nerve damage. Could be the result of previous injuries or abuse. Possibly both. She paused, voice barely above a whisper. He's in constant pain. The weight of those words settled like snow on Nora's shoulders. She knew what pain looked like. She had carried it for months through a funeral no child should attend, through Ellie's silence, through sleepless nights, filled with questions that had no answers. She stared again at the form. Unadoptable. As if his suffering made him disposable. As if a number on a sheet could erase what she had just witnessed. You really think he's dangerous? Nora asked again, her voice firmer now. Sharon hesitated. I think he's traumatized. And trauma, when cornered, lashes out. He has a record of biting not hard, not deep, but it's there. He hasn't responded to any handlers. He won't eat when staff are nearby. He's shut down. That's why we can't release him. Except to euthanasia, Nora murmured. Sharon didn't respond. Nora looked back one more time. Ellie's lips moved in, whispers only Milo could hear. The child who barely spoke to her own mother was now carrying on entire silent conversations with a dog everyone else had written off. And the dog, broken, bleeding, discarded, was listening. You saw it too, Nora said, turning towards Sharon, something steely building in her voice. He wasn't afraid of her. He chose her. He didn't just let her touch him. He moved to her. Sharon's voice cracked under the pressure of truth and protocol colliding. Yes, I saw. And I've been here 10 years. I've never seen that before. Not from a dog this far gone. Nora took a deep breath, steadying herself against the storm inside. I'm not saying I'm sure, she said. I'm saying I can't walk away from what I just saw. Sharon looked down at the paperwork in her hand. Slowly, reluctantly, she pulled a different form from the back of the stack. Emergency adoption procedures require supervisor approval, she said quietly. You'll need to sign waivers liability, health risk, behavior risk, and a vet needs to examine him before release. I'll sign whatever I have to. You should talk to your family, think it through. Oh, I don't have family left, Nora replied, not unkindly. Just her. Sharon looked again at the girl sitting beside the cage, still humming her soundless lullaby to the dog who had stopped wanting to exist until today. She handed over the forms. I'll get the supervisor. As Nora took the clipboard in hand, the pen felt heavier than it should. Every signature was a promise her head screamed at her not to make. Her logic begged her to stop. But her heart, the part that had gone quiet since the funeral, had finally found its voice again. She looked down at the line labeled adopter's name, and she wrote, Nora Hayes. The pen in Nora's hand hovered just above the dotted line. Her name sat there, all restoring back at her in thin black ink. From scene 2.1, but now came the next signature. The one beneath adoption, liability, release. It felt less like a name and more like a contract with chaos. She could still walk away. No one would blame her. A single mother, already balancing rent, groceries, daycare, and grief like fragile plates stacked on each fingertip. What business did she have taking in a dying, possibly dangerous dog? But behind her, Ellie still knelt beside Milo's cage. One small hand slipped through the bars, brushing the rough curve of his ear. The dog hadn't moved since pressing himself against her. He was still breathing, still trembling, but he was still there. And more importantly, he was choosing to stay. Nora signed, one stroke at a time. Initial here, date there, signature again. Every loop of the pen cut deeper than the last, like she was carving a second tombstone for whatever remained of her sanity. The final form was thick, stapled at the top risk waiver for animals with behavioral records. It listed terms in cold clinical language, no expectation of recovery, potential danger to children, not liable for injuries or fatal incident. Oh, she paused when she reached that last clause. Her hands, already dry from winter, felt colder, now like the blood had slowed, reluctant to feed this decision. The clipboard trembled slightly in her grasp. She glanced down at Ellie, who had turned quietly to look up at her mother. Those wide, icy glass blue and full of something too old for 3 years blinked slowly. Calm, steady, unafraid. Mama, she whispered, barely audible. He needs us. It wasn't a plea. It was a truth, delivered in the softest voice imaginable. And in that moment, Nora realized she wasn't just adopting a dog. She was adopting grief in a new form, one she could touch, one that bled and breathed and trembled under her child's hands. She signed again and again, and when the pen dropped onto the desk, something in her exhaled a breath she didn't know she'd been holding since the funeral. "Are you sure?" asked Sharon gently. "You can still—" "I'm sure," Nora said, her voice quieter than before but far more certain. "Even if I'm not." The supervisor appeared a few minutes later, a broad-shouldered man named Cal who had spent 20 years in animal services and wore the weariness like a badge on his windbreaker. He reviewed the forms in silence, then nodded once. "I'll go get him," he said, and disappeared down the hallway. What followed felt like the longest 5 minutes of Nora's life. She didn't sit, couldn't. Her knees were locked, her arms crossed tight across her chest, like a makeshift brace against the weight of what she'd just done. It wasn't until she heard the distant screech of metal hinges and the soft thud of cautious boots that she looked up. Cal was walking slowly. In his arms, Milo hung like a ragged coat draped over branches. He was wrapped in a tattered brown blanket shelter issue, threadbare and smelling faintly of antiseptic. His limbs dangled, his head resting limply against Cal's shoulder. His eyes were open, but barely. He looked smaller than he had behind the cage. Lighter, too light. Nora's throat tightened. Cal approached with the reverence of someone handling something both sacred and fragile. "He didn't fight," he said quietly. "Didn't growl. Didn't even flinch." He glanced at Ellie, who had stepped closer now, her stuffed fox clutched tightly in one hand. "It's like he knows," Cal added. "Like he's already chosen you." Nora took a step forward, reaching out instinctively. Cal gently transferred Milo into her arms. And suddenly, she understood why he felt so light there wasn't much of him left. Under the blanket, she could feel every bone. His breathing was shallow, his body shivering even in the warmth of her coat. He didn't lift his head, but as Ellie stepped beside them and laid her tiny hand on his paw, Milo's eyes fluttered closed again, like peace had finally come to find him. Together, they walked slowly toward the parking lot. Each step felt like an act of rebellion against logic, against fear, against every carefully built wall Nora had constructed to survive. She opened the car door and laid him gently across the back seat. Ellie climbed in beside him, kneeling beside his body with the delicate reverence of a child who understood more than the world gave her credit for. The car door shut with a soft click, muffling the world outside. And for the first time in a long, long while, the silence inside didn't feel like emptiness. It felt like the beginning of something fragile, sacred, impossible, and real. The car doors closed with soft finality, sealing out the chatter of the shelter, the clink of leashes, the smell of bleach and worn linoleum. All that remained was breath, the slow, uneven kind that didn't yet trust the next minute to come. Milo lay curled in the back seat, half swaddled in the threadbare blanket, his ribs pressed against the fabric like warped scaffolding, his coat a patchwork of bare skin and matted fur. He didn't move when the engine turned over. Only his eyes flickered briefly at the sound, then shut again. Ellie sat beside him, knees tucked under her, her pink corduroy coat puddling around her tiny frame. One small hand lay gently across Milo's paw, her thumb brushing lightly over the coarse fur with a soft rhythm of instinct like she already knew comfort didn't need words. The car pulled away from the shelter, tires crunching over ice-crusted gravel. Inside, silence reneged. But it wasn't a hollow silence. It was something reverent, still, as though the moment had built itself a cathedral of snow and breath and fragile trust, and dared them all to break it. Nora kept her eyes on the road, though her vision blurred at the edges. She hadn't realized how tightly she was holding the steering wheel until the cold from her knuckles crept up her arms. Every bump, every stop sign, felt like a test. What if he wakes in pain? What if Ellie gets hurt? What if I made a mistake I can't undo? She glanced in the rearview mirror. Ellie was humming, now barely audible, a tune without name or structure, just soft notes drifting from a soul too small to carry so much weight, yet doing it anyway. It was the kind of melody that made your throat tighten without knowing why. And then she saw it. Milo's head frail and scar tilted ever so slightly toward Ellie. Not in fear, not in pain, In surrender. He didn't growl, didn't flinch. He simply let his head rest beside her knee, one sigh escaping like a ghost, leaving the body it had clung to too long. And in that breath was something more than defeat. There was relief. As if, for the first time in months, he believed he wasn't going to die alone. Nora felt a lump rise in her throat, sharp and unexpected. She bit her lip, hard. Her mind screamed with questions. What if this breaks Ellie? What if it breaks me? The adoption papers lay folded in the glove compartment like a ticking clock counting down to consequences. But then came Ellie's voices soft, like mist sliding through tree branches. He knows we're his now. Nora's heart stopped. It wasn't the words. It was the knowing, the certainty in her daughter's voice. 3 years old, could barely dress herself. Still said breakfast is breakfast. And yet, in this moment, she sounded older than anyone Nora had met in years. She reached for the radio, not to play music, but to feel something break the stillness. Her hand hovered above the dial, then fell away. She couldn't interrupt this. This was sacred. The road home stretched long and silver ahead, flanked by skeletal trees shivering in their winter bones. The snow had stopped falling, but remnants still clung to the windshield edges, as if trying to witness this quiet act of redemption. Behind her, Ellie leaned her cheek against Milo's side. The dog didn't flinch. His breathing still, shallow kept pace with the rise and fall of her tiny shoulders. And then, Milo's tail twitched. Just once. A single, uncertain flick of trust. Nora saw it in the mirror and gripped the wheel tighter, not from fear this time, but from awe. They weren't home yet, but somehow, the healing had already begun. The front door creaked open with a groan too loud for the hour. Cold rushed in behind them, curling through the cramped apartment like a warning. Nora nudged it shut with her hip, balancing the bundle of frail bones and damp fur in her arms. Milo didn't stir. The apartment smelled of dry heat and instant noodles. The kind of place patched together by grit and overtime, filled with furniture that remembered other homes, and a silence too heavy for a mother and child to carry alone. A fraying blanket had been laid out beside the fireplace, an old wool quilt once belonging to Nora's grandmother. The last soft thing she had left that hadn't been sold or donated. Ellie had tucked her favorite stuffed dog next to it hours before, whispering to the space where Milo would be, "He won't be scared if he's not alone." Nora knelt and lowered him gently onto the blanket. His limbs barely responded, just trembled. He weighed so little it terrified her. The fire crackled, but Milo shivered anyway. Not from cold, something deeper, a memory too close to the skin. Nora stood, rubbed her arms, and exhaled hard. Bills peeked out from under the microwave on the counter. The electricity one had a red sticker this time. She looked away. Ellie had already curled into her own bed, sensing that tonight was for grown-up burdens. She didn't ask for bedtime stories, only placed her plastic flashlight near Milo's side, switched to the warm yellow glow, and said, "So he knows the dark won't win." Nora sat on the couch, eyes on the still body near the fire. She had read every word of the shelter's warning packet. Mange, suspected nerve damage, severe neglect, aggressive history, untreatable. The last word hung like a noose. Untreatable. But he hadn't growled, hadn't bared teeth. He had laid his head in Ellie's lap like it was the only thing that still made sense. Now he lay motionless. The bowl of warm broth she placed beside him remained untouched. "Milo," she whispered, trying his name on her tongue. It felt like trying to summon a ghost. His ear twitched. Not enough to hope, but just enough to hurt. Nora stayed up that night, and the next. She laid beside him, brushing his fur when he flinched in sleep. She changed out his water twice, wiped the discharge from his eyes. She Googled home remedies for malnourishment, reached out on Facebook groups for help. No one answered. On the third day, she brought boiled chicken and laid it next to him with a whisper. "If you don't eat, I can't help you." His eyes opened barely. He tried to lift his head. It fell back with a soft thud, but his eyes stayed open. That night, the fire burned low, and so did Nora's body. She lay curled on the couch, hands still draped across the floor toward the blanket. And in the quiet, Milo scooted forward no more than an inch until his nose touched her fingertips. A flicker, a breath, a beginning. The receipt from the vet clinic trembled in Nora's hand like it had its own heartbeat. $842.17. In bold. Underlined. Not including follow-up labs or the second round of antibiotics. She sat in the driver's seat of her aging Corolla, the heater hissing but barely warming. The dashboard glowed faint orange. Ellie slept in the back seat, cheek pressed to her car seat strap, unaware that her mother's world was unraveling in silent pieces. Nora stared at the receipt, then at the bottle of pills in her glove compartment. Hers, the one she'd been prescribed after Ellie's father left, when sleep became a stranger and anxiety became a second skin. She unscrewed the cap, counted, then closed it again. Milo lay at the vet's overnight kennel, hooked up to fluids, his ribs like the ridges of a broken shipwreck. Pneumonia had nearly drowned him from the inside out. The vet had recommended exploratory surgery in a week if his vitals stabilized, likely nerve damage, possibly spinal. They'd shaved part of his flank, revealing deep scarring. Scars that didn't come from neglect alone. Scars that whispered cruelty. She couldn't get his eyes out of her head when they sedated him. When they inserted the IV, eyes that didn't flinch, didn't beg. Just waited. As if pain was a routine he knew well. That night, Nora skipped dinner. Told Ellie they'd do pancake night tomorrow. Her own stomach coiled in hunger, but her mind coiled tighter. What if she'd made a mistake? What if kindness had a cost too steep? She opened her banking app. Red numbers. Rent was due in 5 days. And still, when Milo had shivered on the stainless steel table, when Ellie kissed his paw and whispered, "Be brave," he had turned his head to her voice like it was sunlight. That had to mean something, didn't it? At home, she sold an old ring. She returned the heater she bought last month from Target and used the refund to buy Milo's next antibiotics. She borrowed $40 from her neighbor, lying that it was for Ellie's field trip. The lies made her stomach ache worse than the hunger. She began having her own meds, just until things evened out. She skipped breakfast, skipped lunch, gave Ellie all the meat when they shared soup. She flinched when Milo cried out in his sleep. His dreams were full of whimpers and muscle spasms. The vet had warned her about nerve misfires. He might never walk right. He might never be whole. But what does whole mean to a creature that still wags his tail even when he can't stand? Nora sat on the floor beside his bed, head against the wall. Eyes hollow. Her compassion felt like a wound she kept pressing down on, bleeding love but draining herself dry. At one point, she whispered into the dark, "Am I saving you, Milo, or destroying us all?" But he couldn't answer. So she curled up beside the dog that didn't belong anywhere, just like her. And in that silence, even the guilt didn't dare to speak. The apartment was quiet that morning, save for the soft rustling of pages and the uneven hum of the old radiator struggling against the cold. A pale wash of winter light spilled through the blinds, casting faint shadows that danced on the living room carpet. Nora, in the kitchen, stared at the nearly empty coffee tin, pretending it would magically refill if she looked long enough. On the floor, wrapped in a blanket that had seen better years, Milo lay unmoving. His breaths were shallow but rhythmic, nostrils barely flaring, ribs rising like they had to ask permission. For days, he had eaten little, moved less, and offered no response to touch, sound, or even Ellie's tiny fingers brushing against his paw. Until now, Ellie sat cross-legged beside him, her favorite picture book open on her lap, the one with the talking duck and the moon that cried silver tears. Her voice was unsure, as if reading aloud was a language she was still learning to trust. "Thursday," the duck said. "Hello, Mr. Moon," she stammered, her tiny finger dragging along the sentence. "Are you lonely up there?" Silence. She blinked, glanced at Milo, then kept going, lips tight in focus. "No," said the moon. "I see. Everyone down below." Stillness. But then, a flicker, a twitch. His left ear, once slack and heavy against his skull, gave the smallest, slowest motion. Just once. Ellie froze mid-sentence, eyes wide. She leaned forward, her breath catching. "Mama!" she shouted, scrambling to her feet. "Milo moved!" Nora dropped the tin and rushed in, wiping her hands on her sweatshirt. "He what?" "His ear. It wigged." Ellie pointed with both hands, as if the air itself needed directions. Nora knelt, watched, waited. Milo didn't stir again. But it had happened. Her fingers touched the fur behind his ear, brittle and patchy, like faded grass. No response now. But she could have sworn she'd seen it too. Something quiet, subtle, but real. Later that afternoon, as Ellie colored near the fireplace and Nora folded laundry she didn't remember washing, a soft sound made them both look up. Thump. Just once. A soft, tentative thud of tail on carpet. Nora dropped the shirt in her hands. Milo's tail moved again, barely, but it moved. Not in pain, not in reflex. In acknowledgement. Of life. Of presence. Of them. Ellie tiptoed over, kneeling slowly. "Hi, Milo," she whispered, inching forward like someone approaching a wish. His eyes didn't open, but his tail twitched a third time, faint but deliberate. Nora covered her mouth with one hand, the other pressed against her sternum like her heart might break from its own beating. After days of sterile silence, hopeless vet reports, an invisible weight piling on her shoulders, this simple thump was a thunderclap. He wanted to stay. He wasn't just surviving, he was choosing to live. A single tear escaped down her cheek before she could stop it. She didn't wipe it away. "Thank you," she whispered to no one and everyone. That night, when the house had gone quiet again, and Ellie slept with her hand on Milo's paw, Nora wrote in her old journal for the first time in months. Today, he moved. Not much, but it meant everything. It started with a lick, barely a brush of tongue across a trembling spoon chicken broth, warm and thin, trembling in Nora's hand like hope made liquid. She didn't dare breathe as she held it beneath Milo's cracked, blackened lips. His eyes fluttered open just enough to glimpse the shape in front of him, Ellie. Her knees tucked beneath her, her hands folded tight like she was saying a prayer without words. "Come on, buddy," Nora whispered, crouching beside them. "Just one." The room was still, suspended. And then, slowly, Milo leaned forward. Not with strength, there was none left in him, but with will. He licked. Once, then again. Ellie gasped, then clapped so gently it was more a flutter than a sound. "He likes it, Mama." Nora nodded, too afraid to smile in case it broke the spell. That night, Milo drank 2 spoonfuls of broth. The next morning, 5. By evening, he had swallowed his first bites of soft chicken and rice. Each motion took effort, like his body had to remember what survival meant. But he ate. He chose to eat. And to Nora, that was a miracle. Ellie began helping with the feedings. She'd sit cross-legged in front of Milo's makeshift bed by the fireplace, holding out small pieces with 2 fingers. Careful and slow, Milo, still too weak to rise, nudged them from her hand. Sometimes he missed and bumped her palm with his nose, which made her giggle every time. "Milo's a silly eater," she'd say, wiping drool on her sleeve. But what made Nora pause every time was what followed. The sound of Milo breathing easier. A steady, less labored rhythm. His ribs no longer fought for air. There was still the rattle of infection, but the desperation had faded. Nora kept a notebook now, not just for appointments or medications, but for progress. Asterisk, ate half a cup of food. Asterisk, drank water without syringe. Asterisk, lifted head when Ellie said his name. Tail moved again during bedtime story. She underlined each entry, dated them like milestones, because they were. Every small motion, every eye blink, every muscle twitch meant he was still fighting, still choosing them. One afternoon, as Ellie came skipping into the living room with a handful of crayon drawings, Milo's head lifted. Not all the way, not strong, but it lifted. He tracked her eyes, sunken but focused, ears slightly perked. Ellie stopped mid-step. "He's looking at me, Mama." Nora turned from the sink, saw it. That weary, noble head held just high enough to see the child who'd never stopped believing in him. Her hand reached the back of a chair to steady herself. "Yeah," she said, voice cracked with quiet awe. "He is." That night, as the wind howled outside and the radiator sputtered again in protest, Ellie laid beside Milo and showed him her drawings. "This one's me and you," she said, pointing to 2 stick figures, one with triangle ears, one with yellow curls. "This one's our house. And that's Mama." Milo's head lowered gently to the blanket, his tail making one soft swish against the floor. Ellie leaned in close and whispered, "Don't worry, Milo. I think you're magic too." In the doorway, Nora watched, with arms folded, exhaustion etched across her face, but something else rising behind it, something like quiet faith. She whispered to herself, Maybe this wasn't so impossible after all. The sling arrived in a cardboard box, left by the door, wrapped in faded red tape and the scent of antiseptic. Nora had found it through a rescue forum, a stranger across the state line who once saved a shepherd mix from paralysis. "It's old but sturdy," the woman had said. "Give him a chance to feel the world again." That night, Nora laid the sling across the floor, kneeling beside Milo as the wind brushed snow against the window. She studied the frayed straps, the fleece padding, the heavy-duty buckles, wondering if it was enough. Wondering, not for the first time, if she was enough. Milo didn't resist as she wrapped the sling around his belly. His body, though lighter than it should be, hung heavy with the stillness of long illness. She buckled him slowly, whispering to him like a mother dressing a child. "Just a few minutes outside, boy. Just fresh air. Just snow." And Ellie watched from the corner, wide-eyed and hopeful. Her boots were already on, mismatched gloves on her hands, and her jacket zipped so high it reached her chin. They stepped outside into a hush of white. The snow had come in the night, not deep. Just enough to dust the sidewalk and yard, enough to soften the edges of the world. The cold pinched Nora's cheeks, but the quiet soothed something deeper. There was no traffic, no voices, no deadlines, just breath and frost, and the crunch of feet beneath. Milo stood between them, his legs trembling as Nora lifted with the sling. "Steady," she murmured, holding the handles with both hands. At first, he didn't move. His paws sunk into the snow, and he froze, confused, overwhelmed by light and air. Ellie tiptoed closer and brushed snow from his ears. "It's okay, Milo," she said gently. "It's just winter." And then a shift. One paw forward, the motion wobbly, half collapsed. Another, slow and dragging, but real. Nora felt the strain in her arms as she guided his weight, but she didn't let go. "Good," she whispered, eyes stinging. "That's it. You've still got it." The path they carved was jagged. No rhythm, no grace. But with each hesitant step, Milo moved with more certainty, more ownership of his body. His breaths came heavier now, but they no longer rattled like broken glass. Ellie ran ahead and twirled in the falling flakes, her laughter a bell in the silence. "Look, Milo, it's like magic dust." She lifted her arms and threw snow into the air, watching it catch in the sunlight. Milo turned his head. Not just turned, followed. And in that moment, something changed. His eyes, once dulled by pain and sedation, lit, not bright, not full, but awake. They tracked her as she danced, not with the blank stare of a patient enduring life, but with a flicker of curiosity, of presence. He was no longer merely surviving. He was here. Nora saw it too. Her breath caught as she crouched to his level, her fingers tightening on the sling. "You're watching her," she murmured. "You're seeing her." Milo took another step forward, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. That evening, Nora marked the date in the notebook. First snow, first steps, first look that meant something. Later, as they lay beside the fire, Ellie tucked a blanket over Milo's back and whispered, "I think he likes the snow." Nora ran her fingers through his fur, still patchy, but warmer now, and said, "I think he likes us." And for the first time in weeks, Milo drifted to sleep not out of exhaustion, but peace. The apartment was cloaked in silence, that dense, heavy stillness only winter could bring. Outside, the snow had thickened into a sheet of white, muffling the world. Inside, the radiator hissed sporadically, casting a gentle warmth across the hardwood floor. It was past midnight when Nora stirred. Something was off. She sat up slowly, her joints aching from days of strain, the blanket still clinging to her shoulders. It wasn't a sound that had woken her, not exactly. It was more like a shift in the air, a presence. She glanced toward the fireplace, where Milo's makeshift bed had been laid out with fleece blankets and a heating pad. But it was empty. Her heart stuttered. "Milo?" She stepped out of bed, barefoot, the chill biting at her skin. A faint creak in the hallway led her forward, cautious, uncertain. And then, at the far end of the corridor, just outside Ellie's room, she saw him. Milo was standing, not lying, not half-slung in a towel or cradled in the sling. Standing. His legs trembled with effort, his tail hung still, and his frame swayed, like a tree caught between wind and will, but he stood. He was staring at Ellie's door, unmoving, ears barely lifted. "Milo," Nora whispered, more prayer than greeting. He didn't look back. His eyes were locked on the threshold, as if he could see through it, not just into the room, but into the child's sleep, into her breath and heartbeat. He stood there like a sentinel, like a memory returned. A moment passed, then another, and slowly, wordlessly, he lowered himself onto the floor. Not with the clumsy collapse of illness, but with deliberate care. He curled imperfectly, gingerly, just beside Ellie's door. One paw stretched toward the frame. His head rested on the hardwood. Guarding. Nora watched in stunned stillness. It was as if something ancient had awakened in him, some thread of duty. Not taught, but remembered. Not obedience, but instinct. She backed away without a word, tears brimming quietly in her eyes. In the dark, she opened Ellie's door a crack. Her daughter lay sprawled across her blankets, thumb tucked under her cheek, one sock missing, peaceful, unaware. And outside her door, the wreckage of a dog, once cast off, now claimed this child as his reason for breath. That night, Milo didn't move. Even when the house grew cold, even when his joints begged him to shift, even when Nora whispered, "Come back to bed, boy." Then, he stayed. And in the early hours of morning, as the first faint light bled into the sky and snow rested heavy on the world, Ellie stirred from her room, opened the door and gasped. "Milo?" He lifted his head, eyes heavy, body aching. But he thumped his tail once against the wood floor. She didn't say anything more. She just knelt beside him and curled up there too, one arm slung gently over his scarred back. Nora watched them, girl and dog, sprawled in the hallway like two halves of something whole. And for the first time since that trembling signature on the adoption form, she felt less afraid of what she'd done. It was past midnight when the growl shattered the stillness. Not the sickly, muffled whimper Milo used to make in his sleep. This was deeper, guttural, urgent. It rose through the walls like something torn from the bones of the earth. Nora sat bolt upright in bed, heart hammering. For a moment, she couldn't place the sound until it came again, a feral snarl followed by frantic scratching. She flew from bed barefoot, adrenaline cutting through exhaustion. Her hand groped for the old baseball bat wedged between the dresser and the wall, a leftover from darker days, when she'd lived more afraid than prepared. Another growl. And then a sound she hadn't heard from Milo before. A sharp, broken yelp, not from pain, but panic. "Ellie?" she whispered, then screamed. "Ellie!" The hallway was cold underfoot as she rushed toward the door, flinging it open. There, at the edge of Ellie's bed, Milo was clawing wildly at the blanket, one paw tangled, the other pawing toward her daughter's body with desperation that bordered on violent. "Milo, stop!" Nora shouted, gripping the bat, terrified he'd snap, that something inside him had fractured. But he didn't stop. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he let out a howl that cracked open the silence. Not rage, not aggression, but alarm. Pure warning. And that's when she saw Ellie. The covers had slipped down, her face pale and slick with sweat. Her little body jerked once, then again stiff and unnatural. Nora dropped the bat. "Oh my God, Ellie!" She scrambled forward, hands shaking as she pulled the blanket back. Ellie's lips had gone dusky, her skin blazing hot to the touch. Her eyes rolled back as another convulsion twisted her small frame. Nora fumbled for her phone, her fingers slipping on the screen. 911, please! It's my daughter. She's burning up. I think she's having a seizure. Her voice broke. She wasn't sick. She wasn't... Behind her, Milo backed up only enough to give Nora space, but didn't leave. He stood rigid, tail stiff, eyes locked on Ellie's form, like a soldier watching the line between life and something else. It was then Nora realized. He'd known before she had. He had sensed it, not barked at shadows, not growled at ghosts. He'd been trying to wake her up, trying to save Ellie. The paramedics arrived less than 6 minutes later, but every second stretched like wire through Nora's chest. They took Ellie gently, quickly, voices calm, but their movements precise. Nora rode in the back of the ambulance, clutching Ellie's tiny hand, still damp with sweat. Milo stayed behind, his silhouette visible in the apartment window, unmoving. At the hospital, they said it was a febrile seizure brought on by an acute, undetected infection. Dangerous, but caught early enough to treat. "She's lucky," one nurse murmured. That kind of fever left unchecked. Nora didn't respond. She just stared at Ellie's small body tucked into the ER bed, IV snaking into her arm. Machines beeped steadily, counting time Nora never wanted to lose again. Her mind echoed back to Milo's growl, how it had cut through her sleep like a siren, how he'd scratched at Ellie's bed, not out of madness, but out of instinct. He wasn't just healing. He was watching, protecting. The world had narrowed to the weight of a cell phone in Nora's hand, her voice cracking as she relayed their address through sobs. The dispatcher's words came steady, but far away, like she was underwater, fighting to hear above the rush of blood in her ears. "Stay with her, ma'am. Help is on the way. Don't let her head hit anything hard. Talk to her. You're doing great." Nora crouched beside Ellie, one hand cupping her daughter's clammy forehead, the other trembling against her own chest. "I'm here, baby," she whispered, again and again, like a prayer. "I'm here. You stay with me." Milo hovered nearby, no longer growling, just watching, alert, taut, his breathing shallow. He didn't bark, didn't move, only stood as if guarding the very air around Ellie. Then came the wail of sirens, a sound that should have brought relief but instead carved deeper into Nora's chest. The knock on the door was fast, then the crash of it swinging open. "Emergency services." Boots pounded the hardwood. 2 paramedics and a firefighter flooded the small apartment, cutting through the fog with clipped urgency. "She's seizing. I don't know how long." "She was—" Nora tried to speak, to explain, but her voice collapsed under its own weight. The paramedics took over. Ellie's limp body was gently lifted, placed onto a stretcher. Oxygen. 4 cooling packs. One of them leaned close to check her vitals while the other scanned the room. His gaze landed on Milo, and then a quiet marvel escaped his lips. That dog knew before anyone. Nora blinked. The firefighter nodded, stepping around Milo with care. "My uncle's K9 used to sense seizures. But this? This one's got the gift." Gift. It wasn't the word Nora would have chosen, not for a dog so broken he'd been scheduled to die in silence, not for the weight he'd carried just to survive. But maybe that's exactly what it was. She grabbed her coat and followed the stretcher down the hall. Milo tried to come with her, weak legs stumbling, but Nora turned, knelt beside him, and kissed the top of his head. "You saved her," she whispered. Then she ran. In the ambulance, the world pulsed with sirens and the steady beeping of Ellie's monitor. Her little hand was tucked into Nora's, still hot, but no longer trembling. The fever had spiked so quickly, the paramedic said. It could have been fatal without intervention. Seconds had made the difference. Seconds carved by a growl, by instinct, by a dog that no one wanted. Nora sat in stunned silence, her eyes locked on Ellie, but her thoughts drifted to the apartment. To Milo, to the moment she almost hadn't signed the papers. The moment she nearly walked away from a dog they'd all called impossible. But he had waited, endured, and now he had returned the favor with everything he had. She had saved him once, and tonight he saved her daughter's life. They didn't want to let him in. At first, policy said no dogs, especially not one in such poor condition, mange barely under control, muscles still withered from neglect, patches of fur growing back like islands on a battered sea. But something about the way Milo stood in the hospital hallway, unmoving, unblinking, his chest rising in rhythm with the ventilator beeping behind Ellie's door, made people hesitate to argue. He didn't bark, didn't whimper, just waited. And so, they let him stay. A nurse taped a laminated badge to his collar. Visitor, Milo. It flopped awkwardly when he walked, but no one dared remove it. The overnight staff began referring to him in hushed tones, the one who warned them, the one who knew. Outside Ellie's hospital room, he stood vigil, every night. His legs shook with effort, but he refused to lie down unless Nora coaxed him. He would rise again whenever someone passed too close to the door, his low, rumbling growl enough to make even seasoned orderlies pause. They learned quickly if you approached Ellie's room, announce yourself softly, move slowly, do not pretend. This was not a pet. This was something older, something sacred. Some began leaving bits of food in a bowl beneath the chair beside him. Someone else placed a fleece blanket folded neatly where he could rest his chest. But Milo seemed uninterested in comfort. His eyes never strayed far from the girl inside. On the second night, a janitor, old, slow, kind-eyed, walked past and tipped his cap toward Milo. "You don't see that every day," he murmured to Nora, who sat curled beside the vending machine. "I've cleaned these halls 23 years. Never seen a dog guard a soul like that." Nora looked up, eyes heavy with sleeplessness. "He wasn't supposed to live." The janitor nodded thoughtfully. "Neither was she, I heard." Silence stretched between them. Then Milo rose, ears tilted slightly forward, eyes fixed on the small window in the door. Inside, Ellie stirred. Nora rushed in, heart leaping. Milo didn't follow. He simply watched, as if knowing her waking was not an invitation, but a threshold, and his job wasn't to cross it only to make sure nothing else did. By the time Ellie's eyes fluttered open, her first words were rasped and slurred, but unmistakable. "Doggy? Here?" Nora laughed, then cried. The nurse wiped her eyes behind the curtain, and outside, Milo's tail gave one slow thump. That night, as snow fell lightly against the window panes and machines hummed a lullaby of science and second chances, Nora sat on the floor beside him. She placed her hand on his ribs, feeling the slow, steady heartbeat beneath the scarred skin. "You were meant to protect," she whispered. Milo didn't move. Didn't need to. Because now, it wasn't just instinct driving him. It was purpose, reignited from the ashes of what he once was and what he had always been meant to be. A guardian, a miracle, their miracle. The clinic smelled like antiseptic and wet wool. Nora sat in the corner, clutching Ellie's sketchbook, a nervous habit. Though Ellie was safe now, napping at home with her favorite stuffed fox tucked under one arm, Milo lay stretched on a mat near the exam table, chest slowly rising and falling. His fur had grown in unevenly, but looked stronger. Glossier, the hollowed-out dog they had first carried home, no longer stared back at her. He was still tired, but present. Dr. Ashland entered quietly, holding the scanner in her gloved hand. "Ready to give this a try?" Nora nodded. Her palms felt damp. She had always assumed Milo had a story, but she hadn't expected the vet to find a microchip. Still, Ashland had insisted, every creature comes from somewhere, and sometimes where they've been matters more than where they are. The scanner chirped. Beep. Dr. Ashland frowned, tilted the wand slightly. Then again, beep. Stronger. A read. "Got something." Nora sat up straighter. Ashland turned to the monitor, her brow furrowed. "Oh, what?" Nora leaned forward, heart tapping like Morse code against her ribs. Ashland clicked once, twice, then turned the screen toward her. It wasn't a typical chip registry, not a pet adoption database, not a breeder. It was a military ID. Milo 7, K9 Tactical Division, Unit Bravo Echo, deployed. Afghanistan. Specialty, explosive detection. Status, retired, medically discharged. Handler, Sergeant Aaron C. Vance. Injury, shrapnel trauma, hind limb and auditory damage. Notes, high sensitivity to sudden noises. Displays redirected aggression in civilian settings. Compassionate discharge authorized. Nora blinked. The words blurred. KTT, tactical, handler, IED. Her stomach twisted. Dr. Ashland stepped closer, voice gentled. He wasn't just a stray, he was a soldier. Milo shifted slightly, sensing the tension. Nora dropped to her knees beside him. Her fingers hovered above the faded scars on his flank places she had cleaned, treated, whispered apologies to during late-night feedings. All this time, she had assumed he was broken by neglect. But he had been broken in service. "How did a decorated K9 end up like this?" she whispered. Ashland shrugged, gently pulling up the data feed. After his retirement, he was passed to a civilian family in rural Idaho. It says the handler Vance was killed in action 6 weeks after Milo's injury. He was never reunited. Something in Nora's throat tightened. Passed off, forgotten, trained for war, and left unequipped for peace. The aggression they'd seen, the guarding, the startling, the low growls in crowded rooms. It hadn't been violence. It had been memory, conditioning, the ghost of a purpose lost. She looked at Milo again. Really looked. There was an alertness behind his eyes now, like his body was waiting for the next order, but the world had stopped giving commands. Ashlyn knelt beside her. No wonder he chose Ellie. He wasn't protecting out of instinct. It was muscle memory. He was doing what he was trained to do. Detect danger. Stand guard. Alert someone who could help. Nora nodded slowly, tears burning the corners of her eyes. He saved her, she whispered, and he knew what he was doing. Ashlyn smiled, warm and tired. Of course he did. That dog's not just alive, he's rediscovered who he is. Nora pressed her forehead against Milo's head. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, quietly, almost reverently, she said, "Welcome home, Sergeant." Milo let out a soft, gruff exhale. Not a bark, not a whimper, just a sound like the settling of old bones into something familiar. Something right. The wind outside the vet clinic had picked up, rattling the thin window panes with a restless murmur. Inside, the quiet hung thick, not of peace, but of reckoning. The kind that settles in after a truth has been unburied. Dr. Ashlyn stood by the counter, arms crossed over her chest, watching Milo as he rested near Nora's feet. The glow from the desk lamp caught the uneven lines of scar tissue around his shoulder, a map of pain etched deep into fur and flesh. They trained him to detect IEDs, Ashlyn said softly, to walk ahead of the patrol, to put his body where the danger was. Nora's eyes didn't leave Milo. And when he got hurt, Ashlyn sighed. They patched him up enough to retire him, then passed him to a civilian home, probably without proper transition or support. It happens more often than people think. Well, like discarding a tool once it's bent, Nora muttered. The vet nodded. PTSD in military dogs isn't new. They call it canine combat stress. Tremors, reactivity, even phantom scent detection. These dogs lose their handler, their mission, their structure, and then they're expected to just become pets. Nora felt her jaw clench. Become pets. As if a soldier could just take off their uniform and forget where the blood had dried. They didn't even warn the next family? She asked. Most don't. Sometimes the paperwork doesn't catch up. Or maybe they tried, and no one knew how to help. Ashlyn hesitated. But I've seen this before, Nora. Milo wasn't bad. He was failed. Those words hit like a fist to the gut. Failed. Not broken. Not dangerous. Not unpredictable. Just abandoned by the very system that had once praised his loyalty. Nora knelt slowly beside Milo, her jeans pressing into the cold tile floor. He lifted his head just slightly, the barest motion, but it held weight. His dark eyes met hers. And for a second, she imagined him in uniform, vest strapped tight, tail alert, waiting for a signal on a battlefield he hadn't chosen. She reached forward, cupping his jaw with both hands. The fur there was coarser, worn from wear and old wounds. Her thumbs found the faint scars near his ears, the ones she hadn't noticed at first, thinking them scratches or marks from rough terrain. But now, she knew. Now, she understood. Milo, she whispered, voice tight with emotion. You did everything right. His ears twitched. Tears welled in her eyes, and she leaned closer, forehead nearly touching his. They didn't. The silence after was sacred, like the moment after a verdict. The pause after a confession. Milo didn't move. He didn't need to. Something between them, something wordless, ancient, and sore had shifted. You weren't too much. You weren't a burden, Nora murmured. You were loyal. You were brave. And they didn't see it. But I do. Dr. Ashlyn turned away, quietly wiping her glasses. Nora rested her head against Milo's for a beat longer, her fingers never leaving his face. Outside, snow began to fall soft, indifferent flakes blanketing the sidewalk in white. But inside, a truth had finally been spoken aloud. Milo had never failed. The world had. The air was still when they stepped out of the vet clinic. No wind. No sound. Just the gentle hush of snow settling on the ground like a blessing too soft to be spoken aloud. Nora walked slowly, one hand gripping Milo's harness. He moved beside her with the deliberate pace of someone relearning how to trust each step. Not because of pain, not anymore, but because the world had changed. Again. And this time, so had she. They reached the front of her apartment building. The stairs had always been a small battle for Milo. But tonight, without her saying a word, he took the first step on his own. Wobbly, but certain. Like he was telling her, I'm still here. Inside, Ellie was asleep on the couch, wrapped in the old fleece blanket with faded cartoon foxes. Her thumb was curled near her mouth, a habit she hadn't outgrown yet, and her breathing was soft, steady. Milo paused at the threshold, ears perked, then let out a small breath before settling himself beneath her dangling hand. Not as a guard, not out of duty. As kin, Nora watched them from the hallway, her chest rising with something that felt too big to be called relief. It was deeper than that, older than hope. She stepped quietly into the kitchen. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. Bills were still piled on the table. Her back ached. She hadn't had a proper night's sleep in weeks. But none of it felt crushing anymore. Because something had shifted. Not in the world. In her. She pulled out a ceramic mug, the one with the chipped rim she never threw away, and filled it with warm water. Her hands trembled slightly, not from exhaustion, but from clarity. She walked back into the living room and sat on the floor beside Milo. For a long moment, she just looked at him. His coat caught the soft amber light from the lamp. His scars, now fully visible under the trimmed fur, looked less like wounds and more like medals. Proof he had fought, endured, survived. Milo, she said gently. He raised his head. She didn't blink. I need to say something. Not to a dog, not to a stray, but to you, the soldier you are. He stayed still, but something in his posture shifted, as if he recognized this moment was not small. I've been thinking all this time that I rescued you, Nora whispered. That I took in something broken, something forgotten. But the truth is, I didn't save you. She placed her hand gently on his chest. You survived on your own. You carried things I'll never understand. You gave everything you had, and when the world turned its back on you, you kept going anyway. Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. I see you now. Not as something I'm trying to fix. Not as a weight I'm carrying. She leaned in, until her forehead pressed to his. I see you as family. The words tasted like vows. Sacred. Binding. Not for ceremony, but for truth. No more pity. No more apologies. You're not less. You're not used up. You are Milo. And from this moment forward, I honor that name. The one you carried in silence, through gunfire and betrayal, and somehow, through all of it, still had enough love left to save my daughter. Milo let out a low, almost imperceptible whine, a sound not of pain, but of acknowledgement, of release. And Nora, for the first time in weeks, smiled through her tears. In that small apartment, filled with chipped cups, overdue bills, and broken things held together by will, a new vow had been made. Not of ownership, not of repayment, but of reverence. And beside the couch, Ellie stirred. Her hand dropped onto Milo's head, small fingers curling into his fur. Family. It started with a brush. Soft, plastic-handled, missing a few bristles. Ellie had found it in the back of the closet, tucked between an old shoebox and a pair of crutches Nora never quite got around to donating. She held it up like treasure. Mama, can I brush him? She asked one evening, standing at the edge of the living room while Milo lay near the window, head resting on his paws. Nora glanced from Ellie to Milo, who didn't move, didn't tense. His eyes opened, slow and steady. Watching, listening. Nora nodded. Ask him, is... Ellie took a step forward, her tiny socks making no sound on the hardwood floor. She crouched a few feet away, holding the brush out like an offering. Milo, can I help you feel soft again? He didn't flinch. That alone felt like a miracle. The first stroke was tentative, hesitant. The brush dragged lightly through the thick fur along his neck. He blinked, but didn't move. She tried again, this time across his shoulder. The fur there had started to grow back coarse at first, but no longer patchy. The wounds beneath had sealed. Not healed completely, but closed. From the kitchen, Nora watched as her daughter brushed, gently, rhythmically, the kind of motion that soothed both the giver and the receiver. She remembered doing the same for her own childhood dog long before grief and rent and hospital bills made everything complicated. By the third evening, brushing had become ritual. By the fifth, Milo leaned into her hand. Strangers still made him wary. When Nora's neighbor, Miss Halverson, stopped by with soup, Milo positioned himself between her and Ellie. Not aggressive, just firm, guarded. He didn't bark, didn't growl, just stood like stone until he decided the visitor was safe. Dr. Ashland called it selective reintegration. Nora called it learning to breathe again, and little by little, the edges softened. A week later, Ellie invited 2 friends from her class over for a short visit. They brought construction paper, glitter glue, and the kind of laughter that didn't ask for permission. Milo retreated to the hallway, at first eyes alert, tail still, but he didn't hide. And when the girls squealed too loudly, he didn't bolt. Instead, he watched, listened. And after a while, as Nora handed out juice boxes and cookies, she noticed something new. Milo stood a few feet away from the circle of children, not part of it, but not apart either. One of the girls, Ava, reached out her hand. Milo sniffed it cautiously, then allowed a single stroke on his head before stepping back. Not fear, not rejection, just boundaries. That night, Ellie brushed him longer than usual. She hummed softly, off-key, her fingers tangling gently in the thickening fur around his neck. "You smell better now," she whispered. "Like outside in warm blankets." Milo let out a low, satisfied exhale. Not a sigh, not quite, but something between ease and presence. In the quiet hours after Ellie went to bed, Nora knelt beside him, brushing stray hairs from the carpet. "You're doing so good, you know," she murmured. "It's okay to take your time." Milo didn't respond with a wag or a lick, just met her gaze, steady and clear. The haunted look was gone. Not entirely, ghosts don't leave that easily, but they no longer ruled the room. For the first time since she'd brought him home, Nora realized Milo wasn't just surviving. He was choosing to stay. There was never a single moment where it happened, no flash of recognition, no dramatic turning point. But somewhere between snowmelt and the first green shoots pushing through the backyard garden, Milo and Ellie began speaking a language neither of them had to learn. It was in the way her eyes would drift to him first, before speaking. The way he would lift his head when her voice cracked, just slightly. The way silence between them felt understood. On a rainy Tuesday, Ellie sat on the couch with a book in her lap, one she had tried to read 3 times but couldn't seem to finish. The pages had become blurry, not because the words were too hard, but because the tears had come soft and sudden. For no reason she could name, Milo, from across the room, didn't hesitate. No bark, no whine, just motion. He stepped over with that same deliberate, grounded gait of his, the kind that had once belonged to a soldier but now moved like something ancient and wise. He rested his chin gently on her knees, eyes upturned, still as stone. Ellie sniffled, ran the sleeve of her sweater under her nose. "You always know," she whispered. She slid down onto the floor beside him. He let her curl against his side, her small hands twisting into the thick ruff of fur at his neck. That night, Nora stood quietly in the doorway and watched them fall asleep like that, a girl and her dog. No words spoken, but volumes exchanged. Sometimes it went the other way. One morning, Ellie raced out the front door without her coat, wild with laughter, chasing the wind in the promise of spring. Milo thudded down the steps after her, tail a flag of joy. He barked once, short and sharp, not in warning, but celebration. She twirled in the driveway, arms flung wide, and he circled her like a tether made of muscle and memory. When she laughed like that, his tail beat the ground like a drum, unafraid, unfiltered. And when she paused too long in front of a neighbor's dog, Milo stepped forward, placing himself just slightly ahead, the soft rumble in his chest, not a threat, but a reminder. Nobody touches what I protect. Nora noticed it most in the in-between hours dusk, especially. When Ellie would sit on the rug, absently coloring, and Milo would lie behind her, nose pressed gently against her back. Sometimes she'd hum. Sometimes she'd whisper thoughts she didn't tell anyone else. And Milo never moved, just listened. Like he knew that secrets, once spoken aloud, needed a witness, not an answer. One night, a thunderstorm rolled in, the kind that made windows rattle and shadows dance across the walls. Ellie had never liked storms. They reminded her of machines in the hospital, of things out of her control. She crept from her bed, blanket in tow, found Milo in the hallway. He didn't bark, didn't flinch, just looked at her. Without a word, she lay beside him, wrapping her blanket over both of them. His body curved protectively around hers, like muscle remembering instinct. The thunder boomed. The rain slammed the roof. And neither of them moved. By now, Milo knew Ellie's moods before she did. A slight shift in her breath. The way her shoulders tensed before a doctor's appointment. The way her voice became high and quick before school projects. He would place his paw on her foot, not heavy, just there. He'd press his head into her lap like a weighted anchor. Sometimes that was all it took. And Ellie understood too. When his breathing got shallow at night, she'd crawl out of bed and lay near his crate, one hand on his back until it slowed. When loud noises startled him, she didn't scold, just waited. Present. Steady. When his old scars ached and made him limp, she didn't ask questions. She just brushed him longer that night. They were a unit now. A quiet, invisible thread stitched between them, not forged in commands or tricks, not taught, just earned, one silent glance at a time. It started as a whisper of an idea, a passing thought Nora had while drying dishes one morning in early spring. She glanced at the calendar, paused over a date that had once meant nothing, then everything. The day he came home, the day a worn-down, trembling creature had stood between life and something lonelier than death, and chose them. And they, broken in their own ways, chose him back. So Nora circled the date in red ink, then in green, because Ellie said Milo liked that better. Then she wrote in block letters across the top, Milo Day. The morning came with sunshine for once, the kind that nudged through windows like a warm breath. Nora was already in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, apron smudged with peanut butter and oat flour. She moved with a quiet focus, not rushed, not distracted. Joy without guilt. It had taken her years to even recognize what that felt like. The oven timer dinged. She pulled out the cake, a lopsided, golden brown round of goodness, filled with banana and just enough peanut butter to make Milo's ears perk up the second it cooled. It's not a party without cake, she said softly, placing it on the counter. Behind her, Ellie was hunched over the coffee table, watercolor markers fanned around her like flower petals. Her tongue peeked out between her lips as she focused on every stroke. A green paw print, a crooked heart, 3 stick figures, one tall, one little, one with ears too big. And in bold letters, thank you for choosing us. At noon, they brought out the little paper hats. Milo hated his. He pawed at it twice before giving Nora a look that said everything a quiet protest, tinged with tolerance. She took it off and kissed his head in apology. Fair enough, soldier, she whispered. You've worn enough gear in your life. They sat in the backyard, a blanket spread across the grass. Ellie held the card in both hands like it was sacred, and handed it to Milo with ceremony. He sniffed it carefully, then pressed his nose to her cheek, his way of saying, I know. Nora placed the cake down with a single candle, unlit. We don't need fire, Ellie giggled. We've got him. Milo, ever the gentleman, waited for the nod, before digging in his tail, sweeping back and forth like a pendulum measuring joy. Crumbs flew, laughter followed. And Nora, she sat back, arms propped behind her, watching the two of them. The girl who'd once cried herself to sleep after every hospital visit. The dog who'd once flinched at his own shadow, now locked in a moment that felt like grace. Later, Ellie insisted they do awards, a tradition they'd made up seconds earlier. Best tail wag, she declared, draping a construction paper medal over Milo's neck. Best couch cuddler. Best secret keeper. Best friend ever. She looked at Nora for the last one. Nora blinked back tears as she nodded. Unanimous, she said. Best decision we ever made. As the sun dipped low, Ellie curled up next to Milo under the willow tree, his back against hers, the grass soft beneath him. Nora took a photo not to post, not to share, just to remember. A girl. A dog. A day that hadn't existed last year but now felt eternal. There was no party music, no guests, Just three beings who had lost things they couldn't name and had found something even better. A new tradition, a quiet reclaiming. That night, Nora tucked Ellie in and lingered at the doorway. She heard the soft thud of Milo's tail against the floor as she turned. "Thank you," she said. Not for guarding, not for saving Ellie, but for staying, for choosing to love again. And as she walked to her room, heart full but light, she realized something she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. She wasn't carrying the weight of what-ifs. For the first time in a long time, she was simply happy. The park looked different now, not because the trees had changed, but because they had. Nora stood at the edge of the field, a blanket rolled under one arm, a cooler bag clinking softly in the other. Ellie skipped ahead, a red balloon dancing behind her, tied snug around her wrist like a bright, defiant flag. Milo kept pace between them, steady, measured, not tense, not tail-tucked, just present. The sky stretched wide and cloudless above them, a kind of grace that couldn't be scheduled, only received. They found their spot beneath an old oak, the same one Nora used to sit under when Ellie was still small enough to nap in her lap. The bark had deepened with time, the roots more gnarled, but its shade felt like home. "Here," Ellie announced, flopping onto the grass with ceremony. Milo circled once, then twice, before settling down beside her, head on paws, eyes scanning the perimeter like muscle memory. Not nervous, just aware. His ears twitched, but his body was calm. A soldier at rest, a sentinel off duty, but never unseeing. Nora unpacked sandwiches, apple slices, 2 thermoses of lemonade, and a carefully wrapped container of dog biscuits. She laid everything out on the checkered blanket and smiled, realizing it had been years since this felt easy. Not performative, not for photos, just a picnic, just 3 souls and a moment of peace. Ellie pulled out a small notebook and crayons. "I'm drawing us," she said, tongue peeking out in concentration. She sketched herself with a swoopy ponytail, Nora with stars for eyes, and Milo with a body too big for the page, a superhero with paws. "You made him bigger than the tree," Nora teased gently. Ellie didn't look up. "He is." The balloon tugged lightly at Ellie's wrist with each gust of wind. It cast a red shadow across the blanket, a soft wobble that made Milo's eyes flick once, then relax again. Every so often, Ellie would lean over and whisper into Milo's ear. Nonsense words, secrets, maybe stories she didn't even know how to say aloud yet. And every time Milo would thump his tail once in reply. Language without translation, but deeply understood. Nora lay back, eyes half shut against the sun filtering through the leaves. A breeze brushed her cheek, and she felt it that elusive quiet. The kind that doesn't demand silence but offers stillness. Inside, months ago, this day would have felt impossible. Back when Ellie was burning up in the back of an ambulance, and Milo was snarling at the edges of a world that had discarded him. But now there was color again. The kind you don't realize you've been living without until it's returned in the pink of cheeks, the red of balloons, the green of spring. She looked over. Milo's gaze hadn't left Ellie. Not once. His head lifted whenever another child ran past, but he stayed grounded, unreadable to most, but not to her. To her, he looked like purpose wrapped in fur. Not just surviving, choosing. The balloon caught on a low branch suddenly, the string snapping from Ellie's wrist in a single pop. She gasped, standing. The red orb rose fast into the sky, vanishing with the kind of finality only children notice. Milo was up in a second, body blocking hers gently, instinct humming beneath his skin. "It's okay," Ellie said quickly, pressing a hand to his side. "It's just a balloon." And he sat. Just like that. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. Because she had something better now. Someone who stayed. They finished their lunch under the hush of tree limbs and breeze. Birds chirped without urgency. A dog barked in the distance. And time, for once, didn't feel like a thief. Before packing up, Ellie pressed her crayon drawing into Nora's hands. "Hang it on the fridge. Okay?" Nora looked at the stick figures, the big dog, the bright sun in the corner. "Of course," she said, but her voice caught on something soft, Because it wasn't just a picture. It was a timestamp of healing. A proof of life. As they walked back to the car, Milo brushed lightly against Nora's side, a contact so deliberate, so unmistakably present, that it nearly undid her. She looked down, ran a hand over his back, and whispered, "Thank you for bringing us back." He didn't need to look up. His tail moved once. That was enough. And in the space between one breath and the next, Nora realized this wasn't a celebration of survival. It was the beginning of life again. The wind picked up again, playful, almost mischievous, tugging gently at the ribbon looped around Ellie's wrist. She laughed as the red balloon wobbled like it had a mind of its own. "Stay with me, silly," she whispered, gripping tighter. But the knot had loosened sometime during the picnic, and without warning, the ribbon slipped free. The balloon soared upward, a flash of crimson against blue sky, then drifted east toward the ridge. Ellie didn't hesitate. "Milo, come on!" she shouted, running before Nora could turn fully from the car. The ridge wasn't far. Just beyond a low fence, past a line of scrubby shrubs and a few warning signs most people never stopped to read. But Ellie was 7, fast, and chasing magic. Milo's ears shot up, tail stiffening. He didn't bark. He didn't pause. He launched, paws barely touching earth. He followed her, closing the gap with every stride. His body knew urgency the way some beings know breath. Instinct wasn't a word to him. It was truth. Ellie reached the ridge, just as the balloon dipped lower, caught in a swirl of air. She reached for it, and the ground caved beneath her. The sound was subtle, a whisper, crack, then a hollow moan from deep below. Earth turned liquid, grass folded in. But Milo was already there. He lunged, jaws closing, not around a threat, but around Ellie's jacket hood. He yanked, using all 70 pounds of muscle and memory, dragging her backward just as the grass gave way. Ellie's legs kicked air. Then, dust. Then she screamed. Beneath her, a black, gaping hole. A hidden maintenance pit, long since forgotten. The kind left behind when parks changed, contractors, or maps were redrawn. The kind no child should ever find. Nora's voice tore through the wind. "Ellie." She sprinted, heart already breaking. Lungs useless, vaulting over the low fence without knowing how. And then she saw it. Her daughter trembling at the edge of a collapsed ridge, and Milo standing firm between her and the hole. His body arched protectively, head low, hackles up. Front paw bleeding from the rocky edge, but he didn't move. Didn't blink. Nora fell to her knees, gathering Ellie into her arms with a sob that cracked her open. She checked her legs, her arms, her ribs, everything shaking. But nothing broken. Ellie was safe, because he had been faster than the fall. Milo took a step back, only now allowing himself to breathe. His body shook, the adrenaline draining out of him like water from a cut hose. He whimpered not in pain, but in release. Nora looked up at him. His mouth was open, tongue curled, panting. There was dirt on his snout, blood on his paw, and something in his eyes she hadn't seen since Afghanistan. Battle. But this wasn't war. This was home, and he had chosen to protect it. Again, a park worker arrived minutes later, eyes wide at the scene. "That pit was supposed to be sealed years ago," he muttered, voice pale. "No one was supposed to be up here." But they had been. And if Milo hadn't, Nora couldn't finish the thought. They sat together on the blanket afterward, Ellie wrapped in Nora's jacket, pressed close to her mother's heartbeat. Milo lay beside them, head in Ellie's lap, eyes half-lidded but alert. Every so often, his body twitched. Not fear, vigilance. Ellie stroked behind his ears and whispered, "You caught me before the sky did." Nora heard it, and her chest caved in the best way, because that was the truth. Back at home, she cleaned Milo's paw with shaking hands. He sat still the whole time, even when the antiseptic stung. When she finished wrapping it, she leaned her forehead to his and whispered, "You didn't hesitate, not once." His tail thumped, once, but the silence between them said what words never could. "I was trained to save lives, and now I've found one worth saving." The news didn't break, it bloomed. One photo, taken by a park ranger's cell phone, captured the moment. A German shepherd standing between a child and the fractured earth, his paw bloodied, His eyes locked forward like a soldier under oath. No leash, no command, just instinct and loyalty. The caption read, "Local dog saves girl from hidden pit hero of Haven Creek." It spread faster than wildfire, faster than grief. This time, the town was hungry for something good. By the end of the week, their porch had become a quiet shrine. No one knocked. No one intruded. But each morning, Nora opened the door to small tokens of gratitude left under the welcome mat. Homemade dog biscuits in paper bags, a child's drawing of Milo wearing a cape, a bouquet of sunflowers tied with a note. "Thank you for staying." Ellie read every card out loud. Milo, ever the guardian, sat beside her like he understood every word. Tail slow and steady, nose twitching at the scent of love. At the grocery store, strangers now looked up from their carts. "That's him, isn't it? The dog from the ridge? What's his name?" "Milo," Nora would say, always with a soft smile. And always the same response. "Tell him thank you." The mayor sent a letter. The local paper ran a feature. Even the school counselor asked if Milo could come speak to the kids. "Or at least wag his tail," she laughed. But to Nora and Ellie, it wasn't about the headlines. Not really. One afternoon, Ellie curled next to Milo on the living room rug, her little hands tracing lazy circles in his fur. She whispered, "They all call you Hero." Milo blinked, rested his head on her lap. "But I think you're something better," she continued. "You're our glue." Nora, standing nearby with a mug of tea, didn't interrupt. Her heart simply broke a little, not from pain, but from the kind of healing that sneaks up on you, the kind that doesn't ask permission. Because Ellie was right. He was their glue. He wasn't just the dog who barked at thunderstorms or curled up on Nora's side of the bed when she worked late. He wasn't just the one who saved Ellie from the fall. He was the thread that stitched them back together gently, one frayed edge at a time. That night, as twilight spilled across Haven Creek and porch lights flickered on like sleepy fireflies, Nora sat with Milo on the front steps. He pressed into her side. No leash, no command, just presence. "I used to think I rescued you," she whispered, fingers combing through the thick ruff of fur along his neck. "But you rescued us." Milo didn't move, but his tail tapped the wood once, like punctuation. Like he agreed. From across the street, a small voice called, "Good night, Milo." Another added, "You're a good boy." Their sneakers scuffed the curb, two neighborhood kids lingering past bedtime just to catch a glimpse of the famous shepherd. The porch light cupped them in a soft glow before they disappeared around the corner, chatter fading into the hush of a winter night. Nora watched them go, her arms wrapped loosely around herself, breath misting in the chill. The smile that curved her mouth wasn't the quick, polite kind she used at work, or the strained one she wore for well-meaning strangers who spoke in careful tones about everything you've been through. This smile unfolded slow, from someplace deep and newly lit tone she hadn't worn since before the accident, before the funeral, before the long tunnel of single-parent nights and hospital corridors. She wiped the corner of one eye with the heel of her palm and knelt beside Milo, the porch boards creaking beneath her knees. He shifted only enough to nose her wrist, checking in the way he always did when her heartbeat changed tempo. She threaded her fingers through the thick fur at his neck, felt the warmth of him curl into her palm. "They all think they know you," she whispered. "They have no idea." A low rumble vibrated through his chest contentment, not warning, and for a moment the whole block felt suspended in that quiet exchange. Christmas lights still dotted a few neighboring houses, even though the holiday had come and gone. Tiny bulbs blinked red and green against fresh snow, each flash catching the resin-coated letters of the plaque over the door. Milo didn't need saving. We did. The sign had warped slightly in last week's sleet, and Ellie insisted they add a coat of varnish once the weather warmed. Nora traced the edges in her mind, remembering the way Ellie's tongue had poked from the corner of her mouth while painting those teal letters, how Milo sat like a stone sentinel during the entire process, tail sweeping slowly. Whenever Ellie giggled at her own messy brushstrokes, she exhaled a long, foggy breath and rose to her feet, joints aching from the cold. "Come inside, Hero." "Warm floor. Full bowl." Milo hesitated, scanning the street one last time, then lumbered up, sinew moving beneath thick winter coat. His gait no longer carried the stiff hitch it once did. Physical therapy. Long walks and Ellie's insistent games of fetch had built fresh muscle where famine and fear had hollowed him out. The vet said his lungs sounded clear, his heart strong. But Nora knew the heaviest healing had taken place in the realm. No stethoscope could measure the unspooling of old battle memories. The soft rewiring that let him sleep through thunder. The way he no longer flinched at men in uniform. Inside, the house greeted them with furnace warmth and the faint vanilla cocoa scent of Ellie's nighttime lotion. A single lamp burned in the living room, haloing the sofa where Ellie lay sprawled across toppled picture books, sound asleep before she'd finished her nightly 10-minute fortress of pillows. Her cheeks held the pink of healthy exhaustion, a stark contrast to the fever-gray pallor Nora remembered from that terrible ambulance ride months earlier. Milo padded over, sniffed the air just above Ellie's face, then settled on the rug beside her fortress, chin on his paws off duty, but still on watch. Nora gathered the books, stacking them on the coffee table. One about planets, one about police dogs, one she'd owned as a child, pages taped and retaped where her own imaginings had once tugged too hard. She slid a fleece blanket over Ellie's shoulders and tucked a stray curl behind a delicate ear. For an instant, she saw echoes of herself at that age-around cheeks, determined brow but Ellie's eyes, when open, held a depth all their own, as if the silence of her earliest years had trained them to absorb everything the rest of her couldn't yet voice. Those eyes had met Milo's across rusted shelter bars and rewritten 3 fates maybe more, Nora thought, considering Captain Vance's letter tucked safely in the drawer. She moved to the kitchen, poured kibble into Milo's bowl, added warm broth, and filled his water. The mundane clinks and splashes felt sacred somehow, small rituals anchoring their new life. In another lifetime, just last winter, she'd measured her evenings in pills and restless pacing. Fear crouched on her chest like a living thing. She remembered skipping dinner to pay vet bills, rationing heat, doubting every choice. Yet tonight, those memories stood at a distance, edges softened by new evidence. Milo rolling in the snow like a goofball, Ellie shrieking laughter, bills slowly shrinking, the fridge covered in crayon art and a framed service ribbon. They were okay. More than okay, they were stitched together in a pattern grief could never have designed. When she returned, Milo lifted his head at the rattle of kibble but didn't stand. His gaze slid to Ellie, then back to Nora, as if asking permission to leave his post. "Go on," she murmured, scratching his ear. "She's out cold." He rose with a grunt and followed her to the kitchen, nails clicking softly. He ate in measured bites, pausing to lap water, then nudged her thigh in thanks before retreating to the living room. Nora brewed chamomile tea, the kettle's whistle low enough not to wake Ellie, and leaned against the counter, steam fogging her glasses. Tomorrow was a workday filled with charting and double shifts, but tonight stretched wide and forgiving. She sipped, letting the heat settle. Back in the doorway, she watched Milo circle once, then twice, before lying beside Ellie again. The blanket slipped. He nudged it back over her with his nose. Nora's throat tightened gratitude, fierce and aching. She set her mug on the windowsill, stepped over pillows, and lowered herself to the rug, cross-legged. Milo's head lifted into her lap automatically, eyes half closed. She stroked the fur along his jaw, feeling the rough scar line hidden beneath. "You're more than stories now," she whispered. "You're home." Her words drifted into the dim as headlights swept briefly across the window, then vanished down the street. She thought of the kids who'd called goodnight, of neighbors placing treats on the porch, of the newspaper clipping taped inside Milo's vet folder. The town's admiration was a warm quilt on cold days, but beneath it lay something quieter, tougher, the covenant between one broken family and one broken dog, mutual rescue, mutual rebirth. No camera crew could capture the way Milo steadied Ellie's breathing in sleep, or how Ellie's laughter replaced the ticking bomb of Nora's anxiety. That bond belonged solely to the trio curled on this rug, lit by a single lamp and shielded by a sign that told the truth to anyone who cared to read. Nora's phone buzzed with a new message. A heart emoji from Captain Vance, arriving just after midnight. She smiled, typed a quick photo of the sleeping pair, and sent it back a silent acknowledgement across state lines. Soldier to soldier, caretaker to caretaker. He's good. We're good. The chime faded into stillness. Deep night settled, the kind that wrapped itself around the house like a guardian as steadfast as the shepherd inside. Outside, Snow whispered against the windows. Milo's breath matched Ellie's, slow and even. Nora eased onto her side, pulled the blanket corner around herself, and closed her eyes, the rug's fabric scratchy against her cheek. She'd move them to bed soon, but for now, this was exactly where she wanted to be. 3 heartbeats tucked beneath one roof, porch light casting a promise on fresh snow, fears folded away in the quiet corners of rooms once haunted. She felt Milo's tail tap once more, a final check-in, before his eyes slid shut and answered with a soft hum, hand resting atop his head. Yes, the town knew his name now, but only she and Ellie knew his soul. And that, she thought as sleep edged around her, was more than enough to keep the dark outside and the light forever burning within. The letter came wrapped in a box she hadn't touched in years. It was tucked beneath an old fleece jacket, the one with his scent still clinging faintly, like memory dusty, stubborn, and impossibly familiar. Nora hadn't opened this storage trunk since the funeral. Maybe longer. But that morning, something told her to. Maybe it was the quiet. Maybe it was Milo resting at her feet, his breath slow and grounded, as if he knew what she needed before she did. Her fingers trembled when she unfolded the envelope. Her name, in his handwriting, still steady, still kenned, still his. Nora, if you're reading this, it means I didn't come home. And I hate that I'm asking you to carry that weight. But I need you to hear me, really hear me. Don't let this break you. Grief is a house with no windows, but it doesn't have to be where you live. Find joy again. You deserve it, even if it's small, even if it's borrowed, especially then. And if it takes a while, that's okay too. Love is patient. I'll wait for you, in whatever comes next. The letter crumpled slightly in her grip as she brought it to her chest. The ache in her ribs returned not from pain, but from that strange fullness that comes when grief and gratitude collide. Her eyes shut, and for a moment, all she could hear was her own breath, heavy and uneven, and the soft rustle of fur shifting on the hardwood behind her. Milo had moved closer. He rested his chin on her knee, amber eyes gazing up, not demanding, not questioning, just being there, exactly the way she used to be. It hit her then, quietly, like a rising tide instead of a wave. She had found joy again. Not loud, not grand, but real. In Ellie's laughter when Milo chased her across the yard. In the way the house felt alive again, filled with toys, muddy paw prints, half-eaten carrots on the floor. In how she slept through the night now, the shadows not quite as sharp. And in Milo, the dog with a soldier's scars and a healer's heart, who asked for nothing but gave everything. She reached out, cupping Milo's face in her hands. "You were never just a dog, were you?" she whispered. "You were the bridge." His ears flicked gently. A slow blink. No words. Just presence. Later that evening, she sat on the porch steps with the letter beside her, and Milo pressed into her side. Ellie was inside, humming off-key while painting a paper crown for Milo the Brave. Ember. Nora looked out across the darkened street and let the silence settle. "I kept my promise," she murmured. Not to herself, not even to Milo, but to him. She found joy again, and it had 4 legs, a heartbeat, and a soul made of second chances. The late sun painted the sky in watercolor soft strokes of amber, lavender, and the last gold of summer. Ellie twirled in the grass, barefoot and giggling, her paper crown tilting sideways on her tangled curls. In one hand, she held a stick like a royal scepter. In the other, a half-eaten cookie she'd forgotten to finish. The yard was her kingdom now, the breeze, her symphony. And at the edge of it all, halfway between earth and heaven, lay Milo. Front paws stretched out, chin resting just before the porch step, eyes locked on every leap, every spin of the little girl whose world he now protected, not out of command, not because he had to, but because she was his. His coat shimmered in the fading light, richer now than it had been months ago. The dull patches had grown full. The ridge of his spine no longer jutted like apology. Even his gait, once stiff with memory, now held something softer. Not youth, but peace. The scars remained, of course. One above his eye, another along his ribs, and the one Nora always touched gently when she whispered, "You did everything right." They hadn't vanished. They never would. But they no longer defined him. Not to Ellie, not to Nora, not to himself. A moth fluttered by. Milo's ear twitched. A bird landed on the railing. He blinked, then settled deeper into his post. Ellie tripped, falling into the grass with a thump and a squeal of laughter. Milo was on his feet instantly. Not alarmed, just ready. She popped up again, unharmed, waving her scepter toward him. "Sir Milo, you may rest now, guardian of the realm." His tail wagged once, deliberate and slow. Then he lay back down, eyes still on her. Nora watched from the porch swing, a quiet cup of tea cooling in her hands. The letter still sat folded beside her, a bookmark in a chapter she thought she'd closed, now reopened, gently, by pause and paint and a child's unfiltered joy. She looked at Milo, not as a rescue, not as a soldier, but as something between both. As home. The sun dipped lower. Crickets began to sing. Ellie, now tired from her kingdom games, climbed the porch steps and curled beside Milo without a word. He shifted just enough to let her lean into his side, her hand finding the thick fur over his chest like instinct. They stayed like that, girl and dog, laughter and scars, the future and the past, breathing as one. From the road, the house looked ordinary, but anyone passing by, anyone who paused to really see, might notice. The porch wasn't just wood and paint, it was a watchtower, and Milo wasn't just a dog. He was the quiet sentinel of something healed. Saturday noon smelled of sawdust and summer paint, the thick, sweet scent that turns a porch into a workshop and a memory into something you can touch. Nora spread old newspapers across the steps, sunlight pooling at her feet. Ellie knelt beside her, brow furrowed like a tiny artisan, clutching a stubby brush loaded with teal. The plank itself was nothing special, a weather-worn slice of pine salvaged from a neighbor's discarded fence. Yet in Ellie's hands and under Milo's watchful eyes it felt like cedar from some ancient, storied forest. She dabbed the first letter, careful, tongue peeking through her teeth. Milo shifted closer, nose twitching at the metallic tang of paint. His tail swept once across the porch, scattering curls of newspaper. "Hold still, buddy," Nora chuckled, steadying the board. "You're the star of the show. Can't have you smearing your own headline." Ellie giggled, dipping again. Teal bled into bold strokes, each letter larger than the last, until the message filled the plank from edge to edge. Milo didn't need saving. We did. When she finished, Ellie sat back on her heels, leaving 2 bright fingerprints on her cheeks. "Is it okay, Mama?" Nora swallowed. The words wavered in sunlight truth, plain and unvarnished. "It's perfect." They waited while it dried. Milo stretched at Ellie's side, chin resting on her bare foot. Every now and then he glanced up at the board as if approving each letter. Nora fetched the cordless drill, and together they chose the spot centered above the doorframe, where first light would catch it each morning. The drill whirred. Wood met wood. And just like that, the house announced its story to anyone who cared to look. Twilight arrived on tiptoe, painting the world lavender. The last of the cicadas hummed their lullaby as Nora carried 3 mugshot cocoa for Ellie, mint tea for herself, and a shallow bowl of warm broth for Miluno the porch. The wooden sign glowed overhead, edges still tacky but letters proud. They settled on the steps, Ellie nestled between Milo's forelegs, Nora close enough to feel the soft give of his shoulder against hers. Street lamps flickered on one by one like guardians lighting torches. Ellie leaned back, gazing up at her handiwork. "Do you think people will understand?" Nora followed her gaze. "Maybe. But the ones who matter already do." She brushed a curl from Ellie's forehead. "It's our story, sweetheart. That's enough." Milo lapped quietly at his bowl, then lifted his head, scanning the dusk just in case. Fireflies winked in the yard. A car door thumped somewhere down the street. Safe sounds, familiar. Nora exhaled, feeling the evening settle inside her bones. For so long, nights had been moments to survive, hours measured by dread or empty clocks. Now they were something else entirely. Pages in a book she couldn't wait to keep writing. Ellie broke the silence first. "Mama?" Her voice was soft, carried on the hush of crickets.
"If Dad can see us, do you think he's proud?"
Nora's throat tightened, but the ache was gentle this time, like a door opening, not closing. She looked at Milo, at the new sign, at the sky where the first star blinked awake. "Yes," she whispered. I think he's smiling right now. Ellie nodded, satisfied. She rested her cheek against Milo's neck. His tail thumped, slow and steady, the rhythm of a metronome marking peace. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Time felt elastic, stretching to fit them perfectly. When the last streak of orange faded from the horizon, Nora stood, flicked on the porch light, and watched it wash across the plaque, those teal letters softly blazing against pine. Milo rose too, joints creaking but spirit bright. He nudged open the screen door for Ellie, a trick they'd never taught him, one he'd claimed as his own. Guardian, doorman, keeper of dawns and midnights alike. Ellie paused on the threshold, looking back at the two worlds, the darkening yard and the warm house, and then up at the sign. She placed a tiny hand over her heart. "Good night, Milo Day," she whispered, as if christening the home anew. Inside, dishes waited, and tomorrow's lists and bills and all the ordinary mess of being alive. But none of it felt heavy anymore, because above the door, in teal paint and honest wood, hung a reminder. They hadn't rescued a broken dog. A broken dog had mended them. And every sunrise hints would pass beneath those words, sunlight grazing each letter, echoing the vow stitched now into the very grain of their lives. We needed him. He chose us. Together, we're whole. Nora woke to that sunrise before the alarm, pulled from sleep by the hush of dawn rather than the shrill buzz that used to jolt her into fight or flight. Gray-pink light seeped through the curtains, tracing a gentle line across the ceiling. She lay still, listening. Somewhere down the hall, Ellie whispered in her dreams, a soft murmur that slipped back into silence. Closer, just outside the bedroom door, came the faint click of claws on hardwood, followed by a snuffle. Milo checking his route, making sure the perimeter held. Once that sound would have made her tense, waiting for the whine of pain or the scratch of anxiety. This morning it was a lullaby, proof that all systems were normal in their small kingdom. A glance at the clock told her she could steal 10 more minutes of stillness, but the warmth of the blankets couldn't compete with the low hum inside her chest. A quiet thrill that today, like yesterday and the day before, began with possibility rather than dread. She swung her feet to the floor. Cold Mexican January still gripped the town, but instead of shivering, she found herself smiling as she reached for slippers Ellie had chosen for her birthday, fuzzy gray with cartoon shepherd ears. Down the hallway, Milo's silhouette appeared, framing the bedroom door. He didn't bark. He just watched, tail giving one lazy sweep as if to say, "Morning, Captain." "Morning, hero," she whispered back. They padded together to the kitchen. The sink was full. Yes, last night's saucepan, Ellie's paint-splattered mug, 2 plates still bearing crumbs of peanut butter toast. There were lunch boxes to pack, permission slips to sign. But a subtle shift had taken place. The chores felt like markers of living, not burdens. Each cup, each crayon stain, testified that the house was inhabited by motion and laughter and the kind of noise that means you're still in the game. Nora clicked on the kettle, measuring loose-leaf tea by instinct. Milo settled on the mat by the fridge, ears flicking at every cupboard door. She scraped kibble into his bowl, drizzling a spoonful of warm broth the vet had recommended for cold mornings. He waited for her permission, a habit that still brought her to tears if she let herself linger on it, then tucked into breakfast. While water heated, she scanned the corkboard on the wall. Ellie's field trip notice, the latest electric bill, a grocery list half crossed out, and Captain Vance's postcard pinned among them like a treasured badge. On the postcard rock canyons under a blazing Arizona sky, he'd written only a line, "Milo's footprints are still beside mine." Nora traced the words. The simplicity carried weight, anchoring her to something larger than the 4 walls around her. Ellie padded in, curls sticking every which way, pajamas twisted from sleep. She climbed onto a chair, propping chin on fist as Milo licked the last drop from his bowl. "We have spelling test," she announced, eyes still heavy but voice determined. "Then we better study over waffles," Nora said. Ellie beamed. Waffles meant batter spattered on cabinets and powdered sugar drifting like snow. But Nora's pulse didn't spike at the thought of cleanup. Instead, she pictured Milo stationed near the table, chin resting on Ellie's knee, tail thumping whenever a syrup-coated square accidentally slipped his way. She pictured their laughter hers, too. That sound used to startle her when it burst out unexpectedly. Now, she let it echo. 30 minutes later, The house smelled of vanilla and coffee. Milo's ears tuned to the pattern of their voices. Letter blends, silly sentences. Ellie's high laugh when Nora rhymed orange with door hinge, like their favorite YouTube comedian. Sunlight poured through the kitchen window in gold ribbons, striking the wooden plaque over the doorframe. The teal letters glowed warmer than flame. A memory flickered. A winter afternoon when that spot above the door was bare. Before Ellie knelt in the yard painting her declaration. Before Milo's paw healed enough to anchor them on nightly walks. The hallway had felt longer then, leading to rooms heavy with half-unpacked boxes and half-lived dreams. Now, the hallway felt like a spine-strong, flexible, connecting every room to the next. School time. Ellie zipped her backpack, then knelt to cup Milo's cheeks in her mittens, eyes level with his. "You're on house watch," she instructed. He responded with a solemn gaze and a lick to her nose, eliciting a squeal. At the curb, the bus driver waved he always slowed when passing their house, just in case Milo was out front playing guardian. Today, the dog sat squarely on the porch step, tail curled around front paws. Ellie boarded, shutting the door behind a grin wide enough to last her the ride. Nora lingered outside longer than usual, breath steaming in brisk air. Across the street, Mrs. Halverson emerged to retrieve her newspaper, raising a gloved hand in greeting. Next door, a college kid scraped frost from his windshield, earbuds in, but glanced over to nod at Milo. The gesture carried respect, as if the shepherd wore an invisible badge of honor that the whole block recognized. She pressed a kiss to Milo's head. Letters and lists can wait. She tugged on boots, grabbed his leash, and they set off the route they took every morning to the park and back. Bare branches rattled overhead, but birds were already testing spring melodies. Milo's gait was confident, a gentle sway that spoke of muscle rebuilt. Once, traffic sounds made him crouch. Today, a delivery truck rumbled by, and he merely regarded it, ears tilting, then moved on. At the park gate, a plaque dedicated to veterans gleamed with frost. Nora paused. She remembered Captain Vance's promise to visit once the roads warmed. He would stand here soon, she thought, and see his partner thriving. She pictured the moment Milo recognized his old commander, whether by scent or posture. She didn't know. She suspected there would be tears, from all three of them. Returning home, Nora let herself in and hung the leash. Bills waited on the counter, yes, but so did overtime hours scheduled next week. Bit by bit, the math was balancing. She sorted envelopes without dread, scribbled payment dates on the calendar beneath a row of tiny paw print stickers Ellie used to track Milo's good news days. There were a lot of stickers lately. The rest of the morning unfolded in small, shining gears, wiping syrup residue, folding laundry, answering a cheerful check-in from the bank teller who had heard about Milo on the local news. She printed photos for Ellie's classroom presentation. Milo rolling in snow. Milo receiving his ribbon. Milo snoozing with half a stuffed penguin between his paws. The printer whirred, spitting out snapshots of proof. Resilience wearing a fur coat. When afternoon sun slanted golden through the blinds, Milo stirred from his spot by the heater and whined softly the irrefutable clock that knew when the bus rounded the corner. Nora grabbed her coat, following him out. They reached the stop just as Ellie bounced down the steps, face flushed with stories. "A+ on spelling," she declared, brandishing a paper stickered with a shining star. Milo barked on sharp, celebratory. Ellie hugged his neck, her laughter muffled in fur. Nora tucked the test into her pocket like treasure. They walked home three abreast, footprints overlapping on the sidewalk. Ahead, the wooden plaque glimmered. As they climbed the porch steps, Nora thought of every sunrise to come, when Ellie would stand taller than Milo, when Milo's muzzle would gray, when Captain Vance would visit, when new challenges would undoubtedly knock. Through each cycle seasons, semesters, heartbeats the sign would stay, aged by rain and heat, but unmoved. Inside, dishes would always multiply. Lists would repopulate. The messy wonder of living would sprawl. Yet Nora understood now that fullness and heaviness weren't the same. Fullness could lift you. Heavy could break you. And the line between them was as thin as a child's finger reaching through shelter bars to touch a muzzle deemed dangerous. Evening crept in. Ellie spread homework across the table. Milo dozed nearby, ear-flicking at every pencil scratch. Nora started dinner, the rhythm of chopping onions blending with distant laughter. A text buzzed on her phone. Mrs. Halverson offering leftovers for Milo, along with a note that her nephew wanted to volunteer at the shelter because of that brave dog. Ripples widening. The porch light flicked on automatically, bathing the plaque in a soft halo. Nora stepped outside a moment, dish towel over her shoulder, and breathed deep. The air smelled of wood smoke from a neighbor's fire, faint exhaust from the passing bus, and something sweeter to perhaps the vanilla candle Ellie had insisted on lighting for ambience. Overhead, the first stars winked against velvet. She looked at the teal words again, traced them in her mind like a pledge. We needed him. He chose us. Together, we're whole. Inside, Milo startled at the fridge door, opening some instincts never dulled but relaxed when Nora whispered,
Just leftovers, pal.
She set a small plate on the floor, slivers of roast chicken, carrot rounds Ellie refused to eat. He waited for her nod, then ate, tail-brushing gratitude across linoleum. After dishes, after a pillow fort bedtime story, after the lamp clicked off and hallway shadows settled, Nora poured one last cup of tea and sat by the window. Milo lay near her feet, chest rising steady, eyes half closed but tracking every creak. She sipped, gaze drawn to the plaque once more, visible through the reflection in the glass. Tomorrow sunrise would kiss those letters again, ignite the vow anew. Tomorrow bills would nudge and coffee would brew, and the world would keep asking its endless questions. She knew her answers now. Choose compassion, honor loyalty, let love do its mending work. The kettle clicked cool. The house exhaled. Nora reached down, fingers brushing Milo's head. His tail tapped one's punctuation. Always. Outside, the night embraced them in hush, and the sign above the door kept silent watch, ready to greet another dawn with the promise carved into its grain. The first flakes arrived overnight, quiet, deliberate, drifting past the street lamp like tiny lanterns on invisible strings. By dawn, Haven Creek wore a miracle. Rooftops capped in white, tree limbs iced in crystal. The whole neighborhood muffled under a hush, so complete it felt like the world was holding its breath. Ellie was up before the alarm, nose pressed to the frosted window.
Snow!
She gasped, the word puffing into a cloud on the glass. Down the hall, Nora smiled at the squeal that followed the sweet, bird-bright sound that had taken months to return after the hospital nights. Milo lifted his head from the foot of Ellie's bed, ears flicking forward. Snow meant cold, meant damp, meant memories of winter fronts in far-off deserts. But Ellie's laughter overrode all of that. He trotted after her, tail low but hopeful, as she scrambled for mismatched mittens and her favorite wool hathi, one with absurd pom-pom ears. "Boots!" Nora called, emerging with a thermos of coffee. "Give us two of each this time." Elle. "Yes, Mama," Ellie chimed, already tugging one mitten onto both hands in her rush. Outside, the yard looked brand new, blanketed and bright, every familiar patch of ground rewritten into possibility. Ellie charged first, leaving tiny prints that spiraled and zigzagged, claiming untouched drifts like a cartographer of joy. Milo paused at the porch steps, nose drawing in crisp air. He gave one tentative sniff at the powder, pawed it, let the fluff melt on his pads. "Come on, Milo," Ellie called, scooping a handful of snow and tossing it skyward. Sparkles showered down like stardust. He stepped forward one paw, then another until all four planted firmly. The cold bit, but it didn't sting the way it used to. Something inside him loosened, as if the snow were turning old scar tissue into soft clay. He lowered his head and pushed it beneath the surface. Nora laughed, startled. "You silly boy." Milo came up with a snout capped in white. Ellie shrieked happy protest as he shook, spraying glittering arcs through morning light. Then, without warning, he dropped to his shoulder and rolled down full tumble, legs in the air, muzzle lolling, tail whipping half circles in powder. It was clumsy. It was glorious. Ellie clapped. "He likes it. Not surviving. Living." Milo bounded back upright, shook again, and trotted a real trot, hips driving strong toward Ellie's fresh pile of snowballs. She offered one, and he bumped it with his nose, sending it scattering. She fashioned another. He pounced, paws splaying, puppy, awkward and perfect. Tracks crisscrossed the yard, tiny boot prints weaving through paw prints broad and confident. Here and there, A long streak where Milo belly slid, letting gravity do the work while Ellie collapsed beside him in giggles. Nora leaned on the porch rail, steaming mug warming her gloves, heart warmer still. Last winter, footprints had told a different story. A mother pacing ER corridors, a dog limping on an IV line, a little girl's single set of small tracks trailing behind ambulance tires. Now there were three interlaced, inseparable. Ellie plopped onto her back, flapping arms and legs. "Snow angel," she declared, hat askew. Milo circled once, as if gauging safety, then lay gingerly beside her, mirroring her pose, front paws out, hind legs folded awkwardly, face turned to the sky. Ellie giggled so hard she lost her mitten in a drift. Nora glanced at Milo, truly looked. His coat had thickened into a deep sable, scars faint beneath the plush. His eyes, once clouded by pain and vigilance, now glimmered cedar amber against the white. This was no longer the soldier waiting for orders. This was a creature discovering play, carving his belonging into the snow one joyful flop at a time. Ellie sat up, brushed flakes from Milo's head, and pressed a mittened kiss to his wet nose. Best snow buddy ever. Milo's tail thumped rhythmically, sending little bursts of powder skyward. From the porch, Nora called, "Hot cocoa in 5." 2 minutes, Ellie bartered, holding up 2 snow-caked fingers. Nora nodded, palms lifting in surrender. In that stolen 2 minutes, Ellie shaped a lopsided snow heart and nestled it against Milo's chest. He looked down, nudged it once, then raised his gaze to Nora's soft, as if asking, "Is this how you show it?" She answered with a nod so small only he would notice. The sun climbed, setting ice diamonds ablaze. Milo rose, shook off one last time, and followed Ellie's sprint to the porch steps, leaving a final chain of paw prints overlapping boot marks, evidence of a pact etched into fresh snow. Inside, coats draped over chairs, mugs steamed, and the wooden sign above the door caught early rays. Milo didn't need saving. We did. Beneath it, 3 sets of wet footprints melted into the welcome mat, pooling together until you couldn't tell where one ended and the others began. For the first time, Nora didn't wipe them away. The mail arrived late, carried by wind that still tasted faintly of snow. Nora stood on the porch with a broom, sweeping away the last crusts of ice, when the carrier handed her a small stack, junk flyers, a bill, and 1 padded envelope the color of desert sand. From Captain Aaron C. Vance, Retred, Tempe, Arizona. Her breath stalled. Captain Vance, Milo's handler. The name buried deep in a microchip report, etched into military logs and Nora's mind ever since Dr. Ashland had unearthed it. She had written weeks ago, part gratitude, part apology, never truly expecting an answer. Yet here it was, heavy with something more than paper. Inside, Ellie's laughter drifted from the living room, where she and Milo wrestled with a squeaky plush snowman. Nora wiped salt from her gloves, broke the seal, and unfolded a letter written in neat, strong handwriting. "Nora, I can't pretend this note is easy to write. When they told me Milo disappeared from the shelter system, I assumed the worst. I should have fought harder to keep him, but grief can make cowards of us all. Your words reached me in a season when I needed proof that good still wins. Thank you for the photographs, Milo under an oak, Milo beside your daughter, Milo wearing that ridiculous paper crown. You should know something. He saved my unit more times than I can count. We called him the Shadow Silent, until it mattered. On the day the IED took his hearing in one ear, he kept moving forward, nose to the ground, refusing to leave my side even as shrapnel rained. I got patched up and shipped stateside. Milo was retired, labeled too reactive. I tried to adopt him, but paperwork, distance, and a spiral of PTSD buried the fight. I failed him. Seeing him now warm, whole, guarding your little girl tells me the story didn't end in that desert. You've given the bravest partner I ever had the retirement he earned. Enclosed is his service ribbon. It belongs where he is loved. I hope you'll accept a visit when roads thaw. Until then, know this. Your family is now part of mine. With respect, Aaron Vance, Captain, U.S. Army, Ret. A smaller envelope slipped from the letter. A crimson and gold ribbon, frayed at one edge, its pin dulled by sand and time. Nora's vision blurred. She sank onto the porch step, snowflakes swirling around her boots like confetti. Behind the screen door, Milo padded forward alert, inquisitive. He nudged the door open with his nose, ears pricked as if drawn by memory. Ellie trailed him, cheeks flushed from indoor play. "What's that, Mama?" she asked, eyes wide at the glinting ribbon. Nora swallowed, voice thin. "A thank you from Milo's soldier." She read Captain Vance's words aloud, steady despite the tremor in her throat. Ellie listened, hands clasped, while Milo sat beside Nora, pressing the weight of his body against her shin. When she reached the final line, "The bravest partner I ever had," his ears flicked, as though the title still belonged to a younger incarnation of himself. Nora held out the ribbon. "This is yours, hero." Milo's nose brushed the metal, then slid to Nora's wrist, warm tongue sweeping once across her knuckles. Not a lick for treats or play but acknowledgement. A soldier's salute in a language beyond words. Ellie picked up the ribbon with reverence. "We should hang it next to the sign," she whispered. Nora nodded. Tomorrow she would frame it beneath the teal-painted pledge. Tonight, she tucked it safely into her pocket, feeling its cool press over her heart. The dusk settled blue. From the street, the house looked ordinary rust siding, crooked mailbox yet inside. History breathed alongside new beginnings, footprints in fresh snow, letters from faraway deserts, and a dog who had learned, at last, that retirement could taste like peanut butter cake and sound like a child's laughter. Milo stretched, shook once, and followed Ellie back inside, tail swishing through the warm air. Nora lingered on the step, let her clutch tight, whispering to the fading sky, "Thank you for bringing him home." A gust lifted the edges of the envelope, carrying sand-scented echoes of battlegrounds and second chances into the night. And somewhere between the hush of falling snow and the glow of the porch light, Nora felt the circle close. Service, sacrifice, salvation, all of it alive in the brave, scar-woven dog now curled beside a little girl's crayons, dreaming not of war, but of whatever tomorrow's play might bring. Dusk slipped across Haven Creek like a velvet ribbon, drawing indigo shadows over rooftops and smudging gold along the horizon. Through the living room window, the last daylight poured a honeyed stripe across the hardwood, landing at the paws of the one who waited there every evening. Milo, sentinel of sundown, keeper of the quiet. Nora clicked off the kitchen light, letting the house settle into candle-soft glow. Supper dishes were stacked, homework tucked away, Ellie freshly bathed and pajama-clad, her curls damp and wild against her cheeks. She padded barefoot to the front room, blanket trailing like a comet tail. Milo's ears twitched first, then his head rose a slow, deliberate lift, nose tasting the cool that slid beneath the doorframe. Every night he checked the world before the world laid down its weapons. Every night he confirmed the perimeter of this little kingdom. 2 bedrooms, a battered couch, a porch light that flickered when wind rattled the wires. Safe. Ellie curled against his flank, blanket cocooning them both. She pressed her lips to the fur along his shoulder, kissing an old scar now hidden beneath new growth. "Good boy," she breathed, the words so soft they seemed to float rather than fall. Milo answered with the faintest hum-half sigh, half rumbled and settled deeper, resting his chin on crossed paws. Outside, the street lamp flickered alive, haloing the wooden sign above their door. Milo didn't need saving. We did. Nora sank into the armchair across from them, the letter from Captain Vance folded into the book on her lap, service ribbon already framed beside Ellie's crayon masterpieces. She watched the pair-child and guardian bathed in lamplight the color of sepia memories. Time felt pliable here, bending to cradle them all. A car passed, tires whispering over snowmelt. Milo's ears angled, tracking. Satisfied, he let them fall again. Nora's heart stilled at the ease of it. No flinch, no adrenaline spike, just a soldier assessing, then releasing. "Thank you, soldier," she whispered. Maybe he heard the words, maybe only the warmth beneath them. But his tail thudded once, a soft punctuation in the hush. Ellie's eyelids fluttered, heavy with the day's adventurous now angels, mug after mug of cocoa, the ribbon ceremony they'd staged at the kitchen table. She tucked her hand beneath Milo's jaw. "Night. Night," she murmured, surrendering to sleep without a second thought. Because why fear darkness when darkness itself was guarded? Nora closed her book without reading a page and simply listened. The steady tick of the hallway clock, the sigh of the furnace, the twin rhythms of a girl's shallow breaths and a dog's deeper ones sinking like distant drums. Outside, snow began again, flakes tapping glass like gentle knuckles. Once upon a time that sound had made Ellie twitch, Milo pace, Nora brace for phantom alarms. Now it was only winter announcing itself. Minutes blurred. The room dimmed, growing lavender, then blue, then the ink of true night. Nora rose, draped a quilt over Ellie's shoulders and Milo's back in one smooth motion. He didn't stir, only opened one eye amber catching candlelight and closed it again. Once he recognized the caretaker who needed no introduction. She kissed Ellie's forehead, then the crown of Milo's head too, and felt the enormity of the path that had delivered them to this doorstep. Desert fire, hospital beeps, shelter concrete, first snow, second chances. Nora straightened, spine lighter than it had been in years. The night held no mines, no fevers, no hidden pits. If danger came again, they would meet it together, girl, mother, guardianate, because fate owed them, but because love had trained them. She dimmed the lamp. The wooden plaque glowed faint in the hall light, letters etched into soft shadow. Beyond it, the world turned quietly on, unaware of the small miracles sealed inside these walls. Footsteps soft as feathers carried her to the hallway. One last glance. Milo, wide-shouldered yet gentle, eyes half closed, but ears tasting every corner of the dark. Ellie, dream, heavy against his ribs, fingers still tangled in fur. Safe, home. Nora let the word bloom inside her chest, unfurling through every empty corridor grief had carved. Then she whispered it just once to the dark that now felt like blessing. Home. A tail brushed the floor in answer. A child sighed contentment, and the night warm, watched, unafraid held them all. Nora slipped into her bedroom but didn't reach for a lamp. Moonlight pooled across the quilt, blue, silver, and quiet. She sat on the edge of the mattress, toes skimming the cool hardwood, and listened. Radiator ticking, fridge humming, Milo's distant breathing a steady ocean surge beneath the house. Amazing, she thought, how those sounds had once meant nothing and now meant life. She exhaled through her nose, letting shoulders drop, feeling the ache that followed good work rather than dread. Her eyes roamed the room, landing on the framed photograph atop the dresser Michael in his construction vest. Arms wrapped around toddler Ellie. Cheeks smudged with drywall dust, grin huge beneath the hard hat. Grief no longer punched her breath away at the sight. Instead, it felt like the weight of a familiar blanket pulled over her shoulders. Still heavy, still there, but warming. She lifted the frame, tracing the glass. "We made it another day," she murmured. She pictured him nodding, approving, maybe teasing her about the mismatched paint cans still stacked in the corner, the half-hung curtain rod. Tomorrow, or the next day. Things got done eventually in this new life. A soft whine drifted down the hall, Milo adjusting and Nora's lips curved. He took roll call, even in sleep. She set the photo back, drew the curtains just enough to watch snowglow halo the street. A single fat flake drifted under the porch light, spinning like a lazy dancer before landing on the rail. Winter refusing to leave, but gentler now. She padded back to the doorway, unable to resist one more check. The hall smelled faintly of lavender and dryer sheets. Ellie's breath puffed against Milo's chest, tiny clouds lost in his fur. The shepherd's tail thumped once when Nora's shadow crossed him. She felt absurdly proud, the way most people feel about report cards or promotions. Proud of rest, of trust, of two hearts beating without fear. She mouthed goodnight, blew a kiss, and returned to her room. Sleep came in slow waves, carrying her first to shallows where thoughts still bobbed. She saw the teal letters over the door, glowing like phosphorescence. She saw Ellie in the yard, wearing a cardboard crown, naming constellations she'd invented. She saw Milo padding beside Captain Vance, noses touching in solemn reunion, war finally laid to rest. Deeper waves tugged her under. The house faded, voices blurred, and dreams opened. She stood in Haven Creek shelter again, but the corridor was sunlit, cages transformed into arches of ivy. A door swung wide at the end, and Milo, sleek and whole, sprinted toward freedom, his paws scattering blossoms. Ellie followed, laughing, hair streaming. Nora blinked, and suddenly Michael was there, holding the door, ushering them into bright air. He looked at Nora, eyes crinkling, and said,
You did it, Harp.
"You found the joy." In the way of dreams, she wanted to answer, yet held no tongue. Instead, she pressed a hand to her heart, feeling it drum like wings. Thunder rolled somewhere. Distantno, not thunder. Milo's low bark seeping into dream. Her eyelids fluttered. Another bark, sharp but measured. Nora jolted upright, heart sprinting. Yellow numerals on the alarm clock read 2:11. She held her breath. Silence. Then a single growl, soft, questioning, not panic. She tossed back the quilt and hurried barefoot into the hall. Milo sat at the front door, silhouette tense but not bristling, his head cocked toward the porch. Ellie remained asleep, undisturbed. Nora's pulse steadied.
What is it, boy?
She whispered. He rumbled again, tail sweeping once, eyes fixed on the door. She peeked through the sidelight. A delivery van idled at the curb, hazard lights blinking. Snowflakes swirled in its high beams. The driver stepped out, placed a box on a neighboring stoop overnight medical supplies for the elderly widow next door. Nora realized and tipped his cap to the house before leaving. Nora sagged against the frame. She knelt beside Milo, scratching under his collar. "Good watch," she breathed. Sentry satisfied. He licked her hand, turned, and patted back to Ellie, circling twice before settling. Nora followed, tucking the blanket snug. She brushed hair from her daughter's brow warm, healthy, and pressed a kiss there. The ache of the ambulance night flashed but passed quickly, replaced by gratitude so fierce it almost stung. She crawled back into bed, pulled the quilt to her chin, and let the hush close again. Not a fearful hush, but the confident silence of a household cribbed in loyalty. She slept, this time without dreams, heavy and unbroken. Morning announced itself with Milo's cold nose nudging her palm. She cracked one eye. Gray dawn, no alarm yet. He wuffed softly breakfast o'clock. She laughed into her pillow. "Slave driver." He wagged, then trotted to Ellie's door, bumping it until hinges creaked. Nora stretched. Bones loose, slipped into slippers. Kitchen light glowed warm against bluing windows. Cereal clinked into Ellie's bowl, bacon hissed for Nora, and Milo's kibble rattled symphonic accompaniment. The radio played Old Soul on low volume. Ellie hummed between spoonfuls, feet swinging. Milo crunched contentedly, tail-thumping cupboard doors. Ordinary, Nora thought. Perfectly, gloriously ordinary. After breakfast, Ellie donned snow boots, while Nora packed lunches, sliding a note into Ellie's bag. "Shine bright, my star." She handed Ellie her parka, and Ellie surprised her by tucking a small drawing inside the pocket. Milo, Nora, Ellie beneath their teal, lettered sign. Nora's eyes prickled. "For your locker at work," Ellie said shyly. Nora kissed her temple. "It'll go right above my name badge." Bus brakes squealed outside. Ellie bounded down the steps, Milo at her side until the sidewalk. She hugged his neck, whispered something secret, boarded. Milo watched the bus trundle away, then trotted back, dew flecking his whiskers. Nora opened the door, heart buoyant. Today held shift charts, prescription refills, grocery lines, but also Milo's quiet company, Ellie's art waiting in her pocket, and the knowledge that grief no longer ruled the halls. They were living in that vow now, day by ordinary day. She glanced back at the wooden plaque as they stepped inside. Early light-kissed teal letters, setting them ablaze. We needed him. He chose us. Together, we're whole. Milo exhaled, settling on the mat, eyes half closed in contentment. Nora bent, pressed her forehead to his. "Home," she said again, just to hear it aloud. His tail answered soft, certain punctuation to the sentence of their lives, and behind them, the door swung shut, on a world finally balanced, the echo of its latch sounding less like an ending and more like a heartbeat. Steady, sure, alive. In the quiet glow of Milo's story, we're reminded that every paw print carries a lesson. Compassion outruns caution, loyalty heals deeper than scars, and the love we give animals is returned 1,000-fold. German Shepherds, so often praised for strength and intelligence, also embody gentleness, intuition, and unwavering devotion. When we open our homes to creatures deemed too broken, we unlock parts of ourselves we didn't know were waiting. Patience, resilience, and the courage to hope again. May Milo's journey inspire us to see beyond labels, to notice the silent heroes in shelters, and to believe that second chances can stitch whole families back together. Let each act of kindness, adopting, fostering, donating, or simply sharing their story spread like footprints in fresh snow, marking a path toward empathy. Because when we choose to love the vulnerable, we don't just save lives, we redefine our own.